The Mid-America Veterans Museum is a 501c3 nonprofit business. The museum would not exist without the donations of our generous community. Your donations ensure the museum continues to share and preserve the stories of our veterans. To donate, visit mavm.org and click on Donate. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only. The primary purpose of the Operation Insight podcast is to educate. The views, information, or opinions expressed on the Operation Insight podcast are solely the views of the individuals or guests involved and by no means represent absolute facts. Operation Insight does not accept responsibility for their views or comments. The Operation Insight podcast may at times cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to suicide, abuse, violence, severe mental illness, sex, drugs, and alcohol addiction. You are advised to refrain from watching or listening to the Operation Insight podcast if you are likely to be offended or adversely impacted by any of these topics. Neither the company, host, director, or the guest shall at any time be liable for the content covered, causing offense, distress, or any other reaction. Welcome to the Operation Insight podcast from the Mid-America Veterans Museum with your host, Jason Galvin, and co-host, Sergeant Ethan Gross. Well, Ethan, we're back at the museum with a very special guest. I'm very excited to have this guest tonight.
I'm especially excited to welcome Lieutenant Commander William Trey Warren, United States Navy, August 1996 to October of 2009. I'm especially excited to welcome Trey because I learned of Trey through a friend of ours, a friend of the podcast, Mr. Dustin Rao. Trey was the featured veteran for this past year's Songs for Soldiers. Part of the reason for that is Trey underwent a type of treatment that we're going to get into later. We're going to talk about Ibogaine and 5-MeO DMT treatment. And that's something I'm really curious to hear Trey's perspective on. Trey will be the first guest we've had that has gone through such treatment. And so I think that's going to be a great education for us and our audience. But all that aside, that's going to come later on in our conversation. Trey, thanks for being here. It's a real pleasure and it's a real honor. Another reason I'm excited to speak with Trey is because Trey's a Top Gun graduate. And I did a little bit of research. I didn't just watch the movies. So Top Gun is officially the Navy Fighter Weapons School. It was originally founded at Naval Air Station Miramar. It's near San Diego. In 1996, which just happens to be the same year that Trey entered into the Navy, the Top Gun, or the Fighter Weapons School, moved to Naval Air Station Fallon, and that's somewhat near Reno, not too close, but somewhere around that area in Nevada. So we're going to talk about a lot of things with Trey, and it's probably going to be very difficult to fit in all the things that Jason and I want to discuss, but we're going to do the darndest we can. So Trey, something we like to start with is getting a perspective of who our guest is and where they come from. So for Jason and I and for our audience, tell us about your upbringing.
I grew up in Dallas, Texas, child of the 80s. When I was growing up, I saw this movie called Top Gun.
Sure.
And I was like joking that, it was the second one that inspired me to join the Navy and fly F-14s. But, I think nobody would believe that, considering I'm 51 right now. So, I saw the first Top Gun and I was like, oh, that'd be kind of cool to fly F-14s. That looks pretty fun. And so, I did my high school career, graduated. I think I was like 8th in my class in high school. Got into the University of Texas, tried to go to the Naval Academy, couldn't get in because my SAT scores were not very high. But got into the University of Texas, started an ROTC there, and ended up picking up a 2-year ROTC scholarship. And I was very thankful of that, because I was just, I was really initially really wanting to go to the academy, but you know, after going to the University of Texas on a scholarship, I was like, man, this was actually better because the Navy still paid for my school, part of my school, and I got to actually experience college.
Have a college experience.
Yeah. And so, I earned my commission in 96 out of the University of Texas and started up flight school. I commissioned in August 96 and started up flight school, I think December maybe of 96.
Did you have a family history of military?
I did, yeah. So my grandfather, he was in the Navy, and he was at Pearl Harbor on December 7th.
Wow. Oh, wow.
He was assigned to the USS Northampton, which was a heavy cruiser. And he was actually, I think he was a second-class petty officer at the time. And he was, he was running the Liberty boat, that Saturday night, Sunday morning. And he was asleep in the Liberty boat, ashore when the attack happened. And so, he never really talked much about it. He told me a few stories here and there, but, that was, I think right before he died, he kind of started opening up about some of his stories. Sure. And so, he went all the way through World War II. He was on the Northampton until it was sunk at Guadalcanal. Oh my gosh. It was sunk by a Japanese sub. Wow. He spent 24 hours, and a little more than 24 hours in the waters, and this is one story he told me, and I was just like, oh my God, he was talking about, they had all the burn victims in the rafts, and everybody that wasn't burned was hanging on the side. Yeah. And people were just getting their legs eaten off by sharks.
I thought you were going to say that.
And so he said he said the decision was you could either swim to Savo Island, which was a smaller island in the Guadalcanal chain. Yeah. But he said it was Japanese held, but it was close enough where you could swim to that, or you could just take your chances in the water. And he said the guys that chose to swim for the island were never heard from again. He decided to hang out on, hanging next to this raft and just, run his luck with the sharks. And, luckily he was able to make it to Guadalcanal. And he said he got to Guadalcanal, and first thing he said, he was greeted by a Marine Corps colonel, gave him a rifle and said, "Welcome to Guadalcanal. Oh you're gonna be a Marine while you're here."
That's awesome.
And so he actually served with the Marine Corps for, I think he was 2.5 weeks, I think he said.
How about that?
And then he was assigned to the USS Iowa after that as a gunner's mate. And then after World War II, crossed into the Air Force and started working for Air Force Intelligence, and was working for Firestone in Bangkok, Thailand during Vietnam. So you can imagine who he was actually working for. And so my dad telling me this story. My dad told me my grandpa was always gone, that he was actually running counterintelligence circles.
That's amazing.
During the Vietnam War. And my dad was I think he said he was a senior in high school in Bangkok. And my grandpa walks in the house one night and tells my grandmother and my dad, "Pack your stuff. We're on a C-130 in 30 minutes. And they're like, "Whoa, what? Wait." And he's like, "Shut up. Don't ask any questions. Just pack up what you can. There's a Jeep waiting outside. I'll tell you everything when we get on the plane." And so there's this like, Jesus, okay. And my dad's like, "I'm about to graduate high school." And he's like, "Well, you can graduate in the States." And so on the C-130 on the way to the Philippines, my grandfather lets out that, those paychecks for Firestone, I wasn't really doing rubber research. I was doing counterintelligence, and I found out that our family name was on the communist hit list. And they had photos. They knew what school you were in. And so, we were burned, and we had to flee the country. And there, my dad was like, "Oh, my God."
Wow.
Better to be alive than graduate.
Yeah. So that was my, I guess, those were like a couple of the stories I heard. And so just, hearing those stories as a, crazy long-haired kid in the 80s, I was like, man, that's pretty cool. I'd love to serve my country.
That is fantastic. I'm so happy you told us that, Trey. I want to make sure we get your grandfather's name out there for posterity's sake. What was his name?
So he was William Kenneth Warren Sr. My dad was junior, and I'm the third.
Gotcha.
And my son's the fourth.
Nice.
The tradition continues.
Yeah.
What were their nicknames? Were their nicknames Trey too?
No. So my grandfather, he went by Ken, and my dad went by Kenny until my grandfather passed, and then he assumed Ken. But my mom and dad divorced when I was 8 or 9. My mom always still called him, Kenny.
So let me guess, Trey, because you're the third.
Yep.
Ah,
that's smart.
All right.
That's smart.
I think
I had to get my deductive reasoning in there.
Yeah. So I'm from Texas, and that's a Southern thing. So I have met a few Treys who actually were named Trey. Probably 80% of the Treys I've met were the third. And
Gotcha.
Trey's a nickname.
That's
okay.
funny.
Awesome.
I wanted to say, so that's the USS Northampton.
Yeah.
You think of the USS Indianapolis. I've never heard of the USS Northampton. That's an incredible story.
It was a heavy cruiser with 8-inch guns.
Wow. Thank you for sharing the story of your grandfather.
Yeah.
Wasn't expecting that when I
That's
asked that
awesome.
question.
Yeah,
So,
I really appreciate that. That's amazing.
so were they a typical military family, lots of traveling?
Yeah, station, so my dad was born in 1947, and so they kind of bounced from Air Force Base to Air Force Base. They lived in Georgia for a while, and then Bangkok, my dad never even really told me where all they lived.
So your grandfather, you mentioned 3 different branches: Navy, Marines, Air Force.
Yeah, the Marines wasn't formal. That was
Not
more
formal,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was more like, hey, you're on this island where we're having a battle on. Here's a rifle. You're a Marine Corps rifleman.
That's
now.
great.
Yeah, he was informally, I guess, a Marine for 2.5 weeks.
And so I know you mentioned that, and this is a very typical story. World War II vets, other vets won't talk much about their experiences. We get that. But you did say that towards the end of your grandfather's life, he seemed to start opening up a little bit more. Do you remember anything specifically he told you?
Not really. He opened up more to my dad and my stepmom than he did to me. I think it was just because of proximity, because I was in college at the time.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really see him as much, when I was growing up, they lived in Gun Barrel City, Texas, which was on Cedar Creek Lake outside of Dallas. It's it's about a little over an hour from my house.
Okay.
I grew up in a suburb of Dallas, Farmers Branch. And so I'd go down there every summer and, go fishing with him and play golf. But, at that time he wasn't really sharing his stories. And so I think my dad and stepmom heard a lot more of the stories than I did. And then they kind of secondhand told me what they could remember, kind of a thing. Down. Yeah, those were kind of really the only, stories I remember. My grandfather always carried a pistol on him, either an ankle pistol or, because he always sitting with this, sitting facing the door.
Interesting.
And so, at the time I just figured out it was because he was doing this, intelligence work. He was an intelligence operative, and so that's why. But then, after my bouts with post-traumatic stress, I'm like, he was probably dealing with some post-traumatic stress in there too, because he was always pretty quiet, always kind of distant.
That was exactly what I was going to ask you next. I was going to ask you about his characteristics as a person. Yeah. So he was pretty to himself kind of guy.
He was, yeah. He wasn't like your loving grandfather.
Sure.
He taught me a lot, but he wasn't one of those, come give me a hug and hey, I love you.
Yeah.
Kind of person. And so, maybe that's why I'm like that with my son. Now that I've kind of come through this, I'm always hugging my kids and telling them I love them.
Sure. Making up for lost time kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Good job, man.
So I don't want to assume anything here. So you've talked about your grandfather. Were there any other relatives?
Yeah, my uncle served in Vietnam. He was a radio man in the infantry. I think he was in the 25th ID, but I could be wrong. I can't remember which infantry division he was in. But
what do you know about that?
Was he drafted or did he sign up?
He signed up.
Okay.
And so he would moonlight as a door gunner on a Huey because they were, and he told me, they were looking for volunteers to be door gunners.
Wow.
And, if we weren't outside the wire, he was like, oh, I'm kind of bored. Yeah, I'll go. I'm just like, man, that's
I'll go do one of the most dangerous things.
Yeah. And so, he would.
Thrill-seeking, man.
He would ride on a Huey as a door gunner when he wasn't outside the wire as a radio man.
Yeah.
And he did one tour in Vietnam, and then he was a drill sergeant after that. I can't remember which basic he was at, but he was a drill sergeant after that. And he did his full enlistment and then got out and went to college on the GI Bill.
Did he ever talk much about his military experience?
Not at the time. He and I have actually gotten closer the last couple of years, as I've been sharing about my struggles with post-traumatic stress. And so, we've talked a little more. And, he said, he's like, yeah, I don't, I didn't really feel like I suffered from post-traumatic stress. He does have some heart and lung problems from Agent Orange,
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam.
Yeah.
But now he's suffering from dementia, and so
Is he down in Texas still?
yeah, he lives in Texas, and so I still try to talk to him every couple of months. But when I was growing up, he and my mom were brother sister, and they grew up 20 minutes from us, and so his twin sons were like they were 2.5 years older than me, 3.5 years older than me. But, we grew up, they were like brothers. And so, I was always over at their house. And so he was kind of like a surrogate father to me when I was growing up. And, but he was always kind of a hard person too, always kind of cold and distant. And so I just figured it was because of his tour in Vietnam.
But he claims he didn't suffer from PTSD.
Yeah. We had conversations about that, I think about a year ago. And he's like, yeah, I've never really, I was just like, okay, I didn't want to really push it.
Sure.
Yeah, and so, but those are conversations I've had with my therapist, where, I'm doing a lot better from my post-traumatic stress, but I still am trying to work through getting reconnected with my emotions again, and being, what I call like a human being again. Sure. And I think that's just something unique to people that have, I've lived in combat for over 2 years, when you add up all my deployments that I spent. And so I think it's just when you've been in combat for so long, killing people, watching your friends die, you just detach yourself from your emotions because you can't survive otherwise. And it's really hard to reconnect back to your emotions again. I mean, I don't cry. The last time I cried was when my grandfather died. And so it's kind of one of the things I'm working on right now is trying to reconnect to my emotions again.
I'm really happy you mentioned that, Trey. We had another guest on. This was Lenore Branch, fantastic lady, Air Force veteran. And she helped us understand, both Jason and I, because I needed an education on it as well. When you deploy, a piece of yourself stays home, stays stateside. And this is how she described it. I'm not trying to imprint this on your experience, but I think it's similar. And there's a shadow of yourself that goes and deploys. Is that sort of how you felt?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever been able to kind of, I guess, put words to it, but I was definitely different when I came home. And I remember, I think it was more the deployment I did with Special Forces. And so, before I left, I flew home to Dallas to see my uncle and my mom, and my uncle, they had like a big party at their house, and it was kind of like a going away party for me.
Sure.
My cousins were there, and I remember, that night, my mom was just, completely, distraught because her brother deployed to Vietnam and he came back different. And I remember her saying, God, Trey, I hope you don't come back a different person. And I'm like, I was kind of like, Mom, I'm going to be fine. Don't worry. I'll be all right. And, I've already done a couple of combat deployments, but it was, I think a lot of my issues that I'm suffering from came from that deployment in 06, 07. Yeah. Because Iraq was just a mess in 06, 07.
Yeah.
And the Special Forces unit I was working with and the tempo at which we were operating was just crushing. And so, that's where a lot of the missions is where a lot of my PTS comes from. But I think a lot of that emotional detachment, my wife and I are separated right now, but she's even mentioned when you came home for R&R, I didn't know who you were.
Trey, when you mentioned what I think I heard is the intensity or the volume of the missions, what was that like? Was it daily? Was it multiple times a day? What was the intervals on that?
It would kind of ebb and flow. Some weeks were pretty quiet, but some weeks it was almost daily. It would just kind of depend on where we were at and kind of what was going on. I can't get into too much of it because
Sure.
it's classified.
Sure.
But, we would have some pretty quiet weeks, but then we would have some weeks where, shit, it felt like every time you went outside the wire, you're in contact.
Did you get a chance after each, no matter how often the interval was, but did you get a chance to decompress, or were you always on, so to speak?
No. So, this is one of the things that was really difficult was, a lot of special forces units, their deployments are, a couple of months, they rip in and out every couple of months, because the op tempo is so high. I was one of, I don't know, like 10 or 11 Navy guys that were sent temporary duty to this unit. And our orders from the Navy were for 1 year to this unit. And so we were stuck in this op tempo for a year where everybody else was, back and forth. You'd get, 2 or 3 months in country, 3, 4, 6 months home. And so, I think that just, being exposed, at least for me, being exposed to that op tempo and so I left that deployment about a month early because I was going right back to a Super Hornet squadron that was about to deploy on an aircraft carrier for 7 more months. And I remember emailing my detailer at the Navy Bureau, and I'm like, dude, I need to get out of here early because I've been doing this for 11 months, and I need a freaking break before I deploy again, and I'm coming right back over here. And so luckily the Navy Bureau was cool, and they were like, okay, yeah, this guy probably needs a break. And so I actually got pulled out at my request about a month earlier than everybody else, so I could just, detox.
Was it affecting you on your missions?
Yeah. And so one of the missions we would do, we would go out looking for people that were captured. We looked for, Americans that were captured, but normally it was Iraqis who were working with Americans captured. Yeah. And all the missions I went on looking for people, we found 0. And so that just wears on your soul after a while.
Yeah.
And I remember walking into our operations office and just telling our operations officer, dude, I can't, this was about a month before I rolled out. And I'm like, dude, I can't do any more of these missions anymore. I'm like, I can't go looking for people anymore.
With no success.
And then, oh, by the way, we'd see intel photos later on of what had happened to them. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I told him, like, dude, this is crushing my soul. I can't do this anymore.
Can you recall if it was, I'm just really curious about the story. Was it a matter of a few hours, like you just missed these guys, or was there really nothing you could have done in the first place type of situation?
Yeah, it really depended on, like, when we got the word. There were some times where it was like we just missed them, but there were some times where it's, we knew, like, there's no freaking way we're going to find these guys. And, yeah, so it really just kind of depended. But, we'd spend days looking for them. And so that's the other thing, too. It's not like we just go out for an hour or two and then come back and, you're sitting there playing video games again. Yeah. We'd spend days looking for these. And that's one of the things that I'm proud about. It's like, hey, when people who, either American military personnel or Afghanis or Iraqis who are working with us, if they got rolled up, we're going to go out and we're going to do everything we could to find them.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things I'm proud of. But it wears on your soul after a while.
Sure.
Never finding these people.
It almost feels like you're never accomplishing your mission.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, I've talked to my therapist about this. And he's mentioned that he's noticed a lot of PTS issues in veterans who really see the world in black and white, right and wrong. And, he mentioned that to me once. And, I was raised in Church of Christ in Dallas, Texas, which, if you're not familiar with Church of Christ, it's like Southern Baptist, very conservative denomination. And so, I had a very strong sense of right and wrong, good and evil, black and white. And so, when you look at the behavioral side of it, I'm like, yeah, well, that kind of makes sense. And so, I'm like, I want to go out and find these people that are working with us.
Right.
And then when you don't, it's a complete tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just,
and you can't really modulate that.
It's hard to process it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you see photos afterwards of, hey, here's why you couldn't find them, and here's what happened to their dead body.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh.
On the mechanics part of it, was the day regulated? Was there a time frame that was consistent, or was it always inconsistent sleep, inconsistent briefings and debriefings? As far as like, you know what I mean? Like in a regular work day, I'm going to work 9 to 5, so to speak. I know I'm going to come home, go to, meet with my family, things like that. I know that I'm going to try to get 8 hours of sleep. Doesn't happen all the time, but my point is that
there's a regimen.
There's a regimen,
Yeah.
right? So when you're in a combat zone, when you're in a deployment, of course anything can happen. I know that, but give us an insight if you can, as much as you can, to was it regulated? And if it wasn't, was that an impact even further on what happened to you?
So we would try to regulate it. So we had day crews and night crews, and we would flip-flop every 2 weeks. So you didn't get always stuck during the day or at night. But, I was on missions where, we'd come off a mission and immediately have to go right back out on another one. And so, I was a night crew, and now I'm on a day mission. I'm a day crew, and now I'm on a night mission. Yeah, and so it was a lot of sleep when you can. And that's part of that op tempo, that I talked about. And so just, doing that day in, day out, at first, it's something new, the adrenaline's pumping.
Sure.
But yeah, after probably month 9 or 10, I was just like, and at that point I knew I was about to deploy again in a Super Hornet squadron.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I got to get out of here. It was pretty brutal.
I can only imagine.
You think of not only the physiological strain, and
Right.
physiological and physical fatigue, but then you add in that psychological fatigue.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at is like, what kind of, addition was that to the barrier of, getting through the whole deployment, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and we do things to try to cope, exercise. I got in really good shape. I was lifting and running all the time, and I was probably in the best shape of my life. So we'd do things to try to help, and there were some weeks where it wasn't bad, and you'd get, good sleep and you'd have a routine, but there were some weeks where it was just nuts. And, you just sleep when you could, and, you ate and slept when you could, you'd bring MREs with you. And so it just kind of really depended on the week and what was going on, because Iraq was a hot mess in 06, 07, 08.
Yeah, it definitely was.
You mentioned seeing things in black and white, Trey. I want to get to that in just a moment, because I think that lends itself really nicely to your time at the Naval Weapons School. But before that, I'm curious about two things. One's, I think, a more serious or mature topic. The other one's just my own curiosity. So your father didn't serve.
Mm-mm.
So you have your paternal grandfather, World War II hero. You have your uncle on your mom's side, Vietnam veteran. Does your dad have siblings? Did he have siblings?
No, he was the only child.
He was the only child.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there was pressure on him to join the military?
I don't think so. And if there was, he never really led on to it. He was always kind of the free spirit, getting in trouble, partying.
He rebelled.
Yeah, and he was even like that when when I was a kid. He was always the partying, and so I don't really think there was a whole lot of pressure on him to join. At least I didn't get that sense, and he never said that there was. And then it's funny you mentioned that, because I've had that discussion with my kids, and I'm not. By no means am I pushing them to join the military, but I'm also not going to stop them if they do want to join.
Sure.
But, I've already told them that, hey, if you guys want to join, we're going to sit down and watch a movie or two, because I want you to understand what you could be getting into before you join.
Yeah.
And that was something that, looking back, other than Platoon, we didn't really have any really movies about what combat was really like.
Yeah.
Until movies like American Sniper came out, and some of the where you start learning like, hey, this is what PTS looks like. Yeah. And so, right now, both of my kids are like, no, Dad, we're not joining the military.
Interest.
After we've seen what happened to you, we're not joining the military.
It didn't take a movie. They just had to look at their...
they just got to look at how much of a hot mess their dad is. But
it's funny you mentioned Platoon. We've heard that movie referenced countless times now. It's really interesting. Another one we've heard referenced is Full Metal Jacket. Is that one you would consider a real life take?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't serve in Vietnam, but I think that's a pretty good movie that kind of delves into some of the stuff that we go through in combat.
Sure.
And, they kind of talk about the mental health a little bit in that movie, where they talk about the guy who was trying to get the psych.
Yeah.
But, even like when you look at Platoon and Full Metal Jacket, they don't really, I think other than like The Deer Hunter, I don't think there's really movies that get into what happened to veterans afterwards.
Yeah.
Right.
Deer Hunter's a fantastic film. I'm happy you referenced that, Trey. Is there another film? I'm just curious because I'm a cinephile, and we'll talk about Tom Cruise in a little bit. He's one of my favorite actors. But is there another film that you would recommend if someone's interested in the military that they should watch first?
I think American Sniper is the one I'd recommend. I think that's the best movie. That was one of the movies that I did exposure therapy on for, weeks and weeks and weeks for my post-traumatic stress. That movie really captures what went on in Iraq. Yeah. Where you've got women, who are carrying IEDs on them. And
children picking up weapons.
Yeah.
And the ROE is probably
it was pretty restrictive. We always use that. We have those discussions all the time. And I see both sides of having the restrictive ROE and a freer ROE. And we can get into this war college discussion about when you're fighting an insurgency.
Sure.
You need to have a restrictive ROE. So I get why the ROE was restrictive. But it doesn't make it any easier on the people on the ground who are having
of course not. Yeah.
And so I think it really shows what was going on. I think more from like, deployment to deployment.
Sure.
when you see Bradley Cooper come home and he's just staring at the TV.
Yeah. It's off.
Yeah. According to my wife, that was me on my R&R when I came home on my R&R. I'm just like sitting there
blank slate,
staring at the TV.
Yeah.
And she's like, "What the F are you doing?"
Wow.
Yeah, and so that's why I think that movie, and that's the movie I would show my kids if they decide they want to join the military, and especially if they're looking at a combat arms in the military. I'm like, we're going to sit down and watch American Sniper, because this is what it's going to be like in combat. This is the worst case scenario of what it could be like in combat.
Do you feel like you got any preparation pieces that would have prepared you ahead of time, or was this completely going in blind as far as what the outcome would be afterwards, if you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think as far as preparation goes, obviously I was never a Marine, but I've got tons of friends who are Marines. I think they probably do it the best for preparing.
Well, they put you with these special forces, right?
Yeah. So we had 3 months standing the unit up, and we got about 3 weeks to get prepared. 3 to 4 weeks.
Was any of that mental preparation of what you're going to see, what you're going to feel, any of that?
No, it was
how to handle it.
It was get your qual on the M4, get your qual on the 9mm. Here's battlefield medicine, battlefield life saving. We basically got a part of basic training that every Army recruit gets. We obviously didn't need to get all the how to salute and uniform stuff, but we got all the battlefields, and that was, we spent like 3 or 4 weeks convoy ops, and that was the training we got. We got zero mental prep.
You think that's intentional from the armed forces, so that you're not focused on that piece, so you're actually focused on performing the mission? Is kind of like a reactive thing instead of having to think about it. Just your perspective.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much that, or because I know there's also, being an officer in the military, there's also a budgetary time to train issue also.
Okay.
And so there is actually a lot of thought in the officer ranks about what do we need to train the warfighter to be ready to go fight. And honestly, I mentioned why I think the Marines do it well is because, they really groom Marine recruits to follow orders. And,
you're a rifleman first.
Yeah. And to really, come out of boot camp where like you don't think about what you're going to do, you just do it.
Yeah.
And I think, being in my line flying fighters, I think, we just inherently kind of learn this, but in the ready room, you kind of build up this, bravado, And I think part of that is protective, because I remember, being on a mission in Iraq in 07, 08, and this is by this point I'm struggling. I'm climbing the frickin' walls on the aircraft carrier, and I think this was partly from my brain injuries. Looking back now after working with a neurologist, I think I was already suffering from brain injuries by that point. But I think my PTS was already starting to kick in. And I remember being on a mission where, we had, I don't know, 5 or 6 guys in a tree line, shooting at friendly troops. And so we drop a 500-pound bomb on them. And, 4 of the 5 get vaporized, and one of them gets his legs blown off, and I'm watching him, crawl on my display. I'm watching him bleed out on my display as he's, crawling. And so, it's, we come back and we're watching the video in the radio room. We're like, oh, yeah, look at that dude, bleed out. But, afterwards, that's just something that's always kind of gnawed at me, being this black and white, right and wrong. And I'm like, I just watched the guy bleed out.
And it's not a movie. It's real life.
Yeah. And it's, I think it's a little easier when you do it in a jet as opposed to, if I was a rifleman and I watched this guy take a bullet, or, if I'm in a helicopter. And, so I think it's a little bit easier when you're watching a display in a jet that's, cruising around.
There's some separation there.
Yeah, there's a little more separation. Yeah. But it's still, after a while, I drop, lots of bombs on vehicles, blowing up IED teams. And, at the time, I'd put the pipper on the guy's head and laze the bomb. I'd generate coordinates for a GPS guy to bomb right on the driver's head. And, we'd laugh about, the bomb going. But, afterwards, like, once you're home and you start dwelling on that, and you're like,
it all adds up.
Yeah, and you're like, man, I'm like killing people and laughing about it. And after a while, that stuff adds up and it starts wearing on you.
Especially with that sense of right and wrong that you grew up with. Yeah. Go ahead, Ethan.
There's so many different branches we could follow here. Trey's given me so many opportunities for my curiosity to be satisfied here. Let me just tag on to what you just said, and I want to go back to something I wanted to ask. Did you find the dark humor of laughing about death and combat, did you find it helpful in those moments, or was it just you were going along with it?
No, absolutely, it was helpful. I've got lots of, friends that that are combat veterans, and we all kind of talk about that now, about how that dark humor was a coping mechanism.
Sure.
Because you're being asked to do something that you were told for 18 to 24 years that you shouldn't do. Go kill another human being.
So the question I want to get back to, we're going to take a 180 here for sure. I appreciate you telling me about your dad and that relationship there. What was your dad's reaction when you decided to join?
My dad was pretty proud. I think he kind of figured I was going to, because, growing up, I'd always talked about wanting to join the military.
Yeah.
When I graduated high school, I was kind of back and forth between enlisting and, going to college. And, my parents were like, hey, you just graduated like 8th or 12th or whatever it was in your high school class. You should probably try this college thing out.
Sure.
And so, I think my dad was pretty proud when I did join, but I think he kind of knew I was going to.
Yeah.
I know my grandfather never showed emotions, but I know he was pretty proud. I remember my dad and grandmother telling me, so he was enlisted, so he couldn't commission me, but he pinned my butter boards on. When I got
That's
commissioned,
cool.
He pinned my ensign boards on.
Yeah.
And I remember my grandmother telling me after he passed that, he talked about how proud he was, of me, pinning those butter boards on me. I was in my choker whites. And so I know my grandfather was pretty proud, and I know my dad was too, and my mom was as well.
I was just going to ask about your mom, because I don't want to forget her, since her brother was in Vietnam.
Yeah, she was happy and proud, but I think she was always apprehensive.
Yeah.
Because, her brother served in Vietnam, and she saw the change, and so I think she was always, worried about, what is this going to do to me?
Even from the get-go?
Yeah. I think it was worse as, after 9/11, and then as the wars went on, I think it was like she was more and more concerned. And, she's mentioned now, about how, she's joked about how much money she spent at the hairdresser, dyeing her hair brown, because, all the gray hair she had from all these combat deployments I was doing.
Well, let's not pass up an opportunity for these choker whites, because I know that those get a lot of Probably a lot of women, right? Because those are the nicest uniforms in the military.
I don't know that. I always thought the Marine Corps had the coolest uniforms.
I think because of Top Gun is what
Yeah,
threw me that
summer whites or the choker whites.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that leads in exactly to what I wanted to ask next. As a fan of Tom Cruise and a fan of the Top Gun series, if you could go back to that moment that you're in the theater watching Top Gun for the first time, what went through your mind?
So I think first of all, growing up and even, now, talking to people, I had no idea the Navy flew. And even, talking to people, today, like, people today still have no idea that the Navy flies airplanes.
Yeah. They figure it's the Air Force.
Yeah. And so, with my granddad being at Pearl Harbor and, I always, I knew about the Navy and I just figured, the Navy ships.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think I was 9 or 10, I was like 3rd, 4th grade, somewhere in there. And so, I hadn't really aged enough to get into history and realize that, there are really big naval air battles in World War II because all the battleships were, were damaged or sunk. And so, I remember, I think one of the first things was I was like, man, that is so cool flying in the Navy. And, because I at the time I was kind of like, yeah, I'd like to fly in the Air Force. That'd be kind of cool. And then I saw that what soon, I now call us idiots that are flying planes off of moving runways. And I was like, yeah, I'd kind of like, that seems kind of cool. I'd like to do that.
It's funny because what I've heard and what I've been told even is that Top Gun is quite nearly a promotional video for the Navy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's got us this question like 2 weeks ago. It's completely inaccurate.
Yeah.
Is it really?
Yeah. Yeah, like when you're going through Top Gun, that scene on the beach. Yeah. I always like tell people, I'm like, yeah, we don't go get half naked and lube up with baby oil and go play beach volleyball. I'm like, Top Gun is the hardest class I've ever been through. I mean, it's, you're in the building every day at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning and you don't leave. If you leave, when you're doing the classroom stuff, you get out at 7-ish at night and everybody will go to the O Club and have a few beers and have dinner. But when you're flying, I mean, you're lucky to get out of there by midnight. You've got 8-hour debriefs and then you've got to prepare for the flight the next morning. It's freaking brutal class. And so you don't have time to go lube up and hang out at the beach.
What's a class size look like?
There's 8 airplanes. And so it's 4 2-seat crews and 4 single-seat crews.
Okay.
And 4 of those are Navy and 4 Marine Corps.
Oh, okay.
So there are, and there's, when I was there's maybe 4 or 5 Marine Corps F-18 pilots and Wizzos on the Top Gun staff.
Do you guys know each other at all, or are you just learning each other the minute you get there? Or how does it work?
So it's it's a great question. So I knew all the Tomcat guys there because by the time I got in the Tomcat world, Miramar shut down, as you mentioned, and all the Tomcats had moved to Oceana, and so everybody in the Tomcat community knew each other, and so I knew all the Tomcat guys that were there on staff. I went through flight school with, so I knew all the guys. I either went through flight school or the RAG with them. Some of the Hornet guys I knew from deployments, but the Hornet community, even to this day, is still split up between East and West Coast. And so unless you've been assigned to a West Coast squadron and you've been in Lemoore for 3 years, you don't really know a whole lot of West Coast guys. I knew some of the Hornet guys, but not a lot of them. And the only ones I knew were guys I deployed with. I didn't know any of the Marines. Because there are Marine squadrons that deploy with Navy air wings on aircraft carriers, but not many. And they're all single-seat squadrons. All the 2-seat Marine squadrons all deploy with the Marine Air Group, the MAG.
Okay.
And so I didn't know any of the Marines. I got to know them just going through the class. But, there's still that camaraderie because, I hate tooting my own horn, because I try to be humble, but it's a process to get accepted to Top Gun. You have to go, first of all, you have to put in an application, then you have to do a brief and a flight with a Top Gun graduate, and then you've got to do, there's like a bit of an interview process. And so you don't go to Top Gun unless there's a billet for you at Top Gun or at one of the weapons schools.
You basically auditioned, essentially.
Yeah.
You send in your audition tape kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they let you know if they want you or not.
Yeah. And kind of the way it works is, I had originally applied to go through one of the last Top Gun or Tomcat classes when I was rolling out of my first fleet squadron. I was in VF 103, the Jolly Rogers. That was my first fleet squadron. And so I had applied to go through the October 2002 class in a Tomcat. And it was pretty competitive. I knew the guys. There was one Rio spot, and I knew the other guys that were applying. And I went through flight school with one of the guys, and I were competing in flight school the whole time. And then the other guy I knew from the training squadron, all really good, Rios. And so man, it's competitive. And then the commander of my air wing, told me, he's like, hey, you might as well pull that package, because even if you get selected, I'm not letting you leave the squadron, because I was trained by the Marine Corps as a ground FAC, and I was trained by the Navy to be a FAC A, or forward air controller airborne. And that's somebody that can control fires within close proximity to friendly troops. And in the air wing in the Navy, there's only 4 air crew that are trained to do that mission. There's 8 people in the entire air wing. In the air wing, you're probably talking about, 50, 60 aviators, and there's 8 of us that are trained to do this mission. And so the commander of my air wing, who's an 06, he's a captain in the Navy, they told me, like, you can put your package in. I'm not letting you leave the deployment. And not only am I not going to let you leave the deployment, I'm going to extend you, because I was supposed to roll out of the deployment like 2 months into it. But because I had this FAC A qual, he's like, I can't let you leave, because we're going to Afghanistan. We need FAC A's. And so not only did I not get to go to Top Gun, I had my deployment extended. And so most people do 36-month orders for their first fleet tour. I did, I think, 40 or 41-month orders. So I did a little over almost 3.5 years for my first fleet tour. Sorry, so you're going to
I was going to say, so when did you finally get to attend Top Gun?
So I ended up instead getting orders to go to the Tomcat Squadron to be an instructor. And so
Gotcha.
I'm about year and a half into that. And at this point, the Tomcat Squadrons are transitioning to the Super Hornet. And it's a complete logistical nightmare. When you've got squadrons transitioning and trying to do this in the middle of combat deployments. Because, by the way, we're still fighting 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
And so the East Coast Weapons School has a billet open for a Wizzo, a Super Hornet Wizzo. But there's no Super Hornet Wizzos who have applied that they really want. And all these Tomcat squadrons are transitioning. And so, this guy I told you about, he and I went through flight school together.
Sure.
We were competing. We were like 1 and 2.
Yeah.
He called. He ended up getting the spot. So he calls me up one day and he's like, "Hey man, what do you think about going through Top Gun and coming here to the weapons school?" And I was like, "In a Tomcat?" He's like, "No, in a Super Hornet." And I'm like, I don't have a Super Hornet qual, right? I'm a Tomcat guy. And he's like, "Yeah, we'll have to figure that part out." I was like, "Yeah, I'd be open to it." And so that started this conversation. And so it's funny. I had to, basically start knocking on doors of different commands around NAS Oceania to find money to send me to NAS Lemoore to get a Super Hornet, what's called a Cat 4 qual, where you basically get 10 hours to get a NATOPS qual.
It's a crash course.
Yeah, it's the minimum amount of hours you need to safely fly the airplane.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I'm going to go through Top Gun in this. And so I got enough money. I actually went to the fighter wing, the Tomcat wing, because, they're going away.
Yeah.
And I knew the commander of the fighter wing. He was an 06, and, he was I knew him from a deployment. And so I was like, "Hey, sir, rumor on the street is you've got money because the Tomcat squadrons are going away. I'm trying to do this transition, and, hey, can I get $20,000 out of your budget?" And so he paid for me I lived in Lemoore away from my wife for 3 months, just trying to fly with any Super Hornet squadron I could get an open seat in, just to build my hours up. And so most aviators start Top Gun with 900 to 1,100 hours in the jet.
Gosh.
I started it with 42.
Wow.
In the Super Hornet.
That's awesome.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, and so I'm still like learning what buttons do as I'm going through the hardest class, in possibly aviation, and I'm still learning what buttons. And every now and then I like hit the wrong button, and the plane would do like a knife edge. And we're in division phase, and the other 3 planes in the division are like, in the debrief, like, hey, what's going on with the knife edge you did there? And the pilot, he was a Tomcat guy, but he had like 150 hours.
Sure.
And he's like, that's my idiot Wizzo, still trying to figure out what some of the buttons in the back do. And I'm like, sorry, I didn't realize we were coupled to a waypoint. And all the other planes they were all Hornet guys to begin with. And so they're all just laughing. They're like idiot Tomcat guys. And there was always a rivalry between the Tomcat community and the Hornet community.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm really happy you mentioned that. So, and I'm definitely no expert in this, but this is what I've read anyway. From what I understand, there's some characteristics of the F-14 that made it more friendly for pilots.
Oh,
or would you not agree with that?
I would say from a flying standpoint, the Super Hornet is easier to fly.
Okay.
Because it auto trims to 1G. The autopilot actually works in it. And the Tomcat was a beast to fly because the engines were 6 feet apart. The Super Hornet, the engines are, I think, like 2.5 feet apart. So the engines in the Tomcat are like 2.5 times farther apart. And so...
What effect does that have for flying?
Not much unless you're single engine. And we lost an engine over Kandahar.
I got you.
And we had to fly 2 hours single engine all the way back to the boat, hoping the other engine would hold on just so we could get at least over the water.
Otherwise, you have to compensate, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so you got to put in a buttload of yaw trim.
Yeah.
That's another funny story because it's, we're doing a night cast mission, over in the mountains in Afghanistan, and, we're on the tanker. And so, it's a long trek to get over to where all the fighting was going on. So the carrier was in the North Arabian Sea off the coast of Pakistan. And we'd have to fly for about an hour and 15-ish minutes, kind of depending on where the carrier was. We'd have to fly a little over an hour to get to the first tanker, which was always just in Afghanistan. Pakistan would let us fly through their airspace, but it was always just in Afghanistan, maybe 30 miles from the border of Iran, and we'd hit the first tanker there and get gas. Then we'd fly all the way to Kandahar and hit the second tanker to get gas.
Gosh.
And then you'd fly another 20 minutes and get into the mission.
Wow.
But yeah, so we're over at Kandahar one night, pitch black, we're on the tanker getting gas, and our wingman's like, hey, how your engines looking? And, and this is one of the things with the Tomcat, I didn't have, the back seat did not have engine gauges. So I'm like, pilot, how are the engines looking? Because only the pilot had the engine gauges. And the pilot I was flying with, I think it was Opie. He was another FAC-A guy. And he's like, hey, they look good to me. And they're like, well, it looks like you guys have sparks flying out of your one of your engines. And we're like, everything looks good. And then, no kidding, we're still getting gas. And about 30 seconds later, one of the engines just goes, pew. And Opie's like, hey, we just lost I think it was the starboard engine. And I'm like, sweet, awesome.
Does that have an immediate effect?
Yeah, he immediately noticed this. The plane started getting squirrely,
Wow.
and we had to pull out of getting gas.
Yeah.
Because as soon as that happened, we started getting this yaw rate.
My gosh.
Where we're on the tanker getting gas, and this plane's right above us, and all of a sudden the plane starts yawing to the right as we're losing this engine.
Cow.
And so he immediately puts in a boatload of rudder. You always step on the good engine. I think I said that right. But he puts in this boatload of rudder to counteract it. And all of a sudden the plane's doing this, and I'm just like, back out. Because, we actually had planes damaged from the drogue that we would get gas from.
Sure.
So in the Air Force, you probably may have seen pictures where they park underneath and fly form, and the boom operator flies the boom into this little port in the back of the Air Force plane, and you just fly form. The Navy likes to make everything difficult. And so in the Navy, we have a probe that comes out of the side of the airplane, and you have to fly that probe into this basket, and then you have to keep it in the basket while you're getting gas. And so you're literally everybody's like eyeball deadlocked on this basket. And when you're pulling out, if you like sink a little bit and you lip the basket then starts shooting everywhere. And the 135 was worse, but it's torn up the front end of airplanes before. And so
I don't want to put the pressure on you for why they chose that design, but that just seems completely idiotic to me. All the pressure's on.
Someone signed a contract to make 100 of them, and they did.
Yeah, that's what we used to joke about. Honestly, it was because of tankers at the boat, because we always have a tanker airborne at the boat for carrier ops. And the joke is, you better be really good at landing at the carrier, or you better be a really good tanker. If you suck at both, you're not going to fly along in the Navy.
Yeah.
And so the other way that, the way the Air Force did it,
yeah,
you'd have to have an awfully big tanker to do that with in the Navy, and it wouldn't fit on the ship. And
I
so,
see. Okay.
and so that's why they had that. So
Gotcha.
the drogues, literally retract into the pod, the retanking pod.
Gotcha.
So it has to fit on a carrier-sized plane, and so that's why
That makes sense.
the A6s were the tankers in Vietnam. Then it was the S3s, and then it was the Super Hornet. So that's why they do it. But we
Gotcha.
always joke and the Navy just like to make things difficult.
Well, I don't want to break up the story. I want to
Yeah.
hear the rest of this. How'd you get out of that situation?
So we end up finished. And so as soon as we get off, we have to go through emergency procedures, for the engine. And then the pilot's like, we're both kind of senior, but we're like, well, what do we do? I'm like, well, we got to finish getting gas, dude, because we've got a long haul back to the boat.
Yeah.
We're looking at a good 2.5 hour trip back to the boat, single engine. So we might as well finish getting our gas. And we were the lead airplane, and our wingman hadn't gotten gas yet. And so we were just like, I don't know about you, but I don't particularly want to hang out on the tanker single engine waiting for our Dash 2 to get gas.
Sure.
So we're going to run the risk, and when we're done getting gas, we're going to start flying back to the other tanker by Iran as a single while he's getting gas, and we'll stay in radio range, and then he can just catch us because he's got 2 engines, and then he can just catch up to us. And so, I was the mission commander on that mission. So I was the one making these calls. And so I'm the junior officer. I'm an 03 making these calls for 2 $60 million aircraft. And so I'm like,
no pressure.
I'm like, I don't know about you, but I don't want to hang out single engine just waiting for him to get gas. And then the pilot was like, no, man, I totally agree. Let's get this thing heading back. And so, we fly back to the tanker next to Iran, get gas, start heading back to the boat, and we're both just like, come on, engine, hold on. Because we had no idea what happened to the engine that shut down.
Sure.
And so, we weren't sure if it was FOD, and what FOD is basically where you soak up some debris in the engine. And so we're like, man, if that engine took it, this engine maybe has some too. And if that engine goes, our only option is to eject.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know about you, but I don't want to eject over middle of nowhere Afghanistan.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Or middle of nowhere Pakistan on the border with Iran. I'm like,
Exactly.
And so I'm like, I would at least like to get over the water if we have to eject. And so, as soon as we got gas on the second tanker, we're like, hey, we're heading towards the ship, just catch up. And so we just started making a beeline to the ship. And as soon as we got over the water, the ship knew what had happened by this point because we checked in with the AWACS, because we had Air Force controlling the airspace over Afghanistan. So we had checked in and we told them like, hey, we lost an engine, because we had to let the Air Force know we got to scrub our mission because we had to go back to the boat.
Sure.
And so they had to backfill us. And so they'd already relayed to the ship that, you got a single engine F-14 coming back, from a 2.5 hour, trek. Luckily, the boat pulled a little closer for us. We get over the water, jettison our bombs in the ocean. You never jettison bombs over the land because that's an IED waiting for somebody to find.
Yeah.
So we jettison all of our bombs over the water.
So is that to help with the weight?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because when you're coming into land, you've got a max weight you can be at to land. And that's kind of what the aircraft can handle.
Yeah.
Because you're going from 170 miles an hour to 0 in the size of about a distance of about a half a football field. And so, the whole idea was, we would normally for these missions carry enough bombs where you wouldn't have to jettison the bombs if you don't drop.
Sure.
But you would have to dump a lot of fuel, and you only then get enough fuel for maybe 2 passes at the boat.
Gotcha.
Before you got to go hit the tanker again.
Yeah.
And so when you're single engine, you got to get rid of even more weight because you don't have the thrust to try to land at the boat. And so we had to jettison bombs, and we only had enough fuel for like a pass or 2.
Crazy.
And so we had to do a night carrier approach, single engine. And that's probably the second closest I've been to it. No, actually, I forgot about this story. That's the third closest I've been to ejecting.
There's two worse than that.
Yeah, there were two worse than that one.
Do those bombs explode?
No, because when I jettisoned them, there were switches in the back that I didn't activate, and those switches would pull the fuses that would arm the bomb.
Basically duds, essentially.
Yeah, and so
just heavy rocks, basically.
Yeah, and so I basically didn't arm those switches so that then when only the pilot can actually jettison the bombs. But, I had to, like, go through my procedures and be like, hey, dude, everything's cool. Go ahead and, get rid of the bombs. And then when he jettisoned the bombs, they came off like they normally do. We just didn't pull the wire out that would arm them.
I got you.
So, I mean, we probably could have and seen a, cool night explosion and blow some fish up. But yeah, we jettisoned them dead. So
what kind of expense, just interested for myself, what kind of expense is each one of those?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I don't know. I'd have to Google it, to be honest.
Make the taxpayers really angry.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
No, I'm just wondering because, I mean, your life is more important than anything, but, I mean, it's just interesting that.
Yeah, I mean, I could guess probably, I don't know, tens of thousands of dollars probably per bomb, I would guess, because they're also guided bombs. So they've got seeker kits. They've got, guided kits on them.
Yeah.
Not to mention the bomb with the explosives themselves, and the kits also. The bombs also have fins on them because they have to be able to steer to guide.
Sure.
So yeah, I would guess probably tens of thousands of dollars per bomb, probably. We always have squadron reps that we can talk to if we're having an emergency. And at night, it's always a very senior squadron person, because night ops at the boat are pretty dangerous. Obviously you're landing on a moving runway at night. And we do it in all weather. I mean, that's probably the second closest I was to ejecting was a hydraulic failure I had in a thunderstorm, and trying to land at the carrier in a thunderstorm at night, losing your hydraulic fluid.
Oh my gosh!
So tell us about that, because
it's a lot of adrenaline going there, man.
I love that you have three separate stories of where you almost had to eject. Yeah. So let's talk about the second one then.
The second one, so I guess to make this quick, because the first one's probably pretty exciting too. So the second one, I was flying with my best friend. He's an airline pilot now, and we talk probably a couple times a week. I was flying with him, and this is on workups for our second deployment, and we're in the Caribbean. We're we're done with the mission. We're joining up with our lead, and there's thunderstorms all around. And when there are thunderstorms, you knew the boat would find them, because what does the boat do? The boat turns into the wind when you're launching and recovering, because you always want to take off and land into the wind.
Sure.
And so where's the wind coming from? Thunderstorms. So guess where the boat's going to be? In the middle of a thunderstorm. and so we're finished with the mission. We're rendezvousing with our lead. And, I still remember this, and this is at night. And so the pilot's like doing this we call it a shit hot rendezvous, where he's like sliding in there real fast. And, it kind of pissed the lead off a little bit. And then as soon as we get rendezvoused, the pilot's like, shit, we're losing the combined hydraulics. And I'm like, it's because of that damn rendezvous you did. I was giving him a hard time about it. And so we start going through the emergency procedures. And because we know it's like, the hydraulic fluid, that's what you steer the airplane with. Yeah. And the Tomcat was, by this point, these airframes are 30 years old, and a lot of the fittings and the bushings are starting to go. And so, they were always, I probably had 6 or 8 or 10 hydraulic failures in the Tomcat just from these bushings going, and you start pissing fluid out. And so, all right, we need to get this plane on deck. And so at the carrier, when that happens, they do what's called an emergency pull forward, where it's, hey, we need to, and this happened in the middle of the launch. And so they're trying to get planes launched as quickly as they can, because
clear space
for the landing area. So the landing area is in the back part of the carrier.
Yeah.
And they normally launch from both the waist cats, which is the back part, that's the front part of the landing area, and the bow cats. And so they're immediately trying to get everybody off the waist cats and get everybody to the bow, because they need to get the landing area open for us. And we're like, and so when we rendezvoused, I immediately tell our lead, hey, we just lost our combined hydraulic side, which is the main hydraulics in the Tomcat. We need to pull forward now. We got to get this thing down there now. And so he knew, and he's like, hey, he's like, Roger. And I said, hey, can you start working that with the boat? We got to get through the emergency procedures. And so he's telling the boat, hey, this is what's going on. We're going through the emergency procedures. And, the funny thing with the Tomcat, you use hydraulic fluid to lower the landing gear. You have to have a certain pressure to do that, and as soon as you start losing hydraulic fluid, you can't maintain the pressure to lower the landing gear. So if you've seen Memphis Belle, and the whole cranking the landing gear.
Yeah.
That's what the pilot has to do.
Oh,
insane.
There's no kidding a crank the pilot pulled out, popped it in this little hole in the bulkhead next to his right knee, and he's sitting there flying the plane with his left hand, cranking the landing gear down.
Holy cow.
Good night.
That's part of the landing procedures. Yeah, I was just like, there's got to be an easier way to do this.
They definitely made it hard on you guys.
Yeah, and we're doing this, by the way, as we're flying in thunderstorms at night, coming into the boat to land. So we get all the procedures done, and, you know, I'm playing co-pilot at this point. You know, by this point, we've kissed our lead off, and he's gone back to the holding stack to hold to come into land. And so we're coming in as a single now, and we're in the thunderstorms. And, you know, and you're always taught in flight school, don't fly in thunderstorms. And then what do you do as soon as you get out to sea? It's like all these rules the FAA has for flying around the States. That shit goes out the window when you're flying in the Navy in combat. And so we're flying in thunderstorms. There's lightning all around us. It's disorienting as hell. And as I think we're about maybe, 2 miles-ish. So, you know, you hit the ball call at 3/4 of a mile, and you start your descent at 3. And so we've already started our descent. And, you know, and the pilot tells me, you know, hey, the stick's starting to jump in my hands. And at that point, I know I'm like, shit, we're about out of fluid. He's starting to get air in the lines.
I was going to ask, at what point in time do you start losing controls?
So as soon as he told me the stick's starting to jump in my hands, I'm like, we're about out of fluid. Wow. And this is about 2 miles. And so I'm like, mother F. And so I tell the boat, I'm like, hey, just be, and by this point, we're talking to the LSOs. The LSOs are pilots that stand on the ship, just between what we call the meatball, but that's like the little orange, you know, dot with the 2 lines.
Sure.
They stand just behind that in the edge of the boat, and they listen to the planes coming in, and they look at you, and they know what you're supposed to look like, and they give you commands to help you land. Yeah. So I come on the radio and tell them, hey, be advised, you know, 105, you know, the stick's starting to jump in our hands. And so, you know, I hear the LSOs come on, and they're like, hey, roger that. We can't see you, but we can hear you. And I'm like, yeah, of course, we're in the middle of a thunderstorm. And I can hear the helo talking to the boat, you know, saying, you know, hey, we're going to snuggle up. Basically, we're going to get close to the boat because they're, you know, just waiting for us to eject. Yeah. Yeah. And at night, at the boat, we always have what we call 2 plane guards. So we either have 2 helos airborne, or a helo and a destroyer or a cruiser, you know, to basically pull us out of the water pretty quickly. Sure. If we have to eject. And so now we're in a thunderstorm, completely on instruments with the stick jumping in the pilot's hands. And I moved my bag out of the way, and I tightened my lap belts up, and I put my right hand on the ejection handle. Wow. And my left hand is on what I call the oh shit bar, but it's on this bar up here. And I'm just waiting to pull the handle. Because
whose call is that going to be?
So the way it's set up is either person can eject.
Okay.
And normally it's the Rio, because the pilot's still, you know, the pilot will fly the damn plane into the ground if you let him sometimes. And so normally it's the Rio that ejects. But either it's set up so either cockpit can eject, both people will go.
Gotcha.
But the problem is that in a 2-seat plane, if you eject straight out, you're going to bounce seats off of each other. And so I can't remember which way it was, because it was one way in the Tomcat and the opposite in the Super Hornet. But in 2-seat airplanes, it's set up so that one seat goes angled this way, one seat angles that way. Well, the problem is when you're losing hydraulics, and if you start rolling, you only have about 15 to 20 degrees of roll before somebody's going to skip off the water. And so that's why I'm like, as soon as we start rolling, I'm ejecting. I'm like, I'm not even going to let you say I've got it. Because I don't want to skip off the water, depending on which way you're rolling.
You break your back.
Yeah.
Yeah, or worse.
Yeah. And so, you know, we hit 3/4 of a mile, and, you know, they say, hey, 105, you know, on glide slope, on, you know, glide path, you know, 3/4 of a mile, call the ball. And, you know, at this point, if, you know, before this, if the pilot can see the ball, the pilot will just, over the ICS, will say, you know, hey, I got the ball, you know, because the Rio always makes the ball call. Yeah. And so, but at this point, we're in the goo, and this is the pilot's call. So the pilot comes up on the radio and says, Clara, which means I don't have the ball. I'm in the goo. And so he calls Clara, and the LSOs immediately come on, and they're talking to the pilot. And they're, you know, and there's, you know, same thing. They're like, you know, hey, we hear you, keep it coming. And they're given basically, they can't give lineup shake. Sure. You know, they can't tell you left, right, because they can't see you, but they can hear your engines. And so they're giving us engine commands like, you know, hey, you know, put a little power on.
But basically they're guessing.
Yeah, for just based on what they're hearing. Yeah. But we still have instruments that we're flying.
Gotcha.
That's that's, they're pretty accurate for getting you into LA. And so we're on instruments, and literally the pilot, I think we break out at about, I don't know, quarter of a mile, eighth of a mile, enough time for the pilot to say ball, make, I think, 2 corrections, and then we slam down on the boat. And luckily we caught a wire, and they always say aircraft carriers have 4 wires. They only ever rigged 2 of them, but to save money and to save the wires. Yeah. And so you only have a 50% chance of actually stopping, because there's only normally they rig the 2 and the 4. And so thank God we stopped, because as soon as we landed, our maintenance guy said the rest of our hydraulic fluid just went all over the flight deck. So if we'd hook skipped and missed the wire and had to get back airborne again, we would have gotten airborne and rolled off and ejected. And so that was the second closest I was to ejecting.
Man. Well, now we got here at the first.
Yeah, so the first one, this was during the day, and I would have ejected if I wasn't flying with the CO of the squadron. This was in the same squadron. And this guy had, Top Gun graduate, 3,000 hours, LSO. I mean, he was probably one of the top pilots I ever flew with. I mean, the guy could fly the shit out of the Tomcat. He was a really good pilot. We were getting shot off the waist cat. I can't remember. I think it was Cat 4. So 1 and 2 were on the bow, and then 3 and 4 were on the waist. And so I think it was either 3 or 4. But we get shot off the waist cat, and every now and then you get what's called a cold cat, where you don't get enough steam power into the shuttle to get you off the deck fast enough. Wow. And so
that's a somewhat common occurrence?
It wasn't super common, but it would happen every now and then because all of our catapult systems were steam driven based on valves. That's why, like with the Ford, they're going this electromagnetic system, so they don't have to worry about the inconsistencies of a steam system. Yeah. Because steam power can be a little inconsistent sometimes. And so when we take the catapult shot, normally after 20 or 30 catapult shots, you kind of know what a good shot feels like. Yeah. And so it was my habit was always like after, as soon as we get shot, I'd be like, okay, good shot. Because you kind of get to know what it feels like. Yeah. Well, this shot immediately, I'm like, I can't remember what I said exactly, but it's probably something like, afterburner, because I knew like this was not a good shot. And all you're looking at is the airspeed indicator, because we brief during the day, min airspeed before we eject is 100 knots during the day. If your experience is 100, and at night it's 110. If you're not, it's 110 and 120. But as we come off the boat, I remember I call 90 knots.
90.
And we come off the boat and immediately settle and drop below the flight deck.
Crazy.
And we set the rat out at 40 feet. The rat out it shoots a little radar signal and bounces off the ground and comes back up. Yeah. And we set it at 40. And so if you hear the rat out go out, you're supposed to eject. And so we settle off the flight deck. Wow. And I just start to hear the rat out going off, and I'm literally reaching for the handle to pull it. And my CO says, I got it, don't eject. And I'm like, I'm putting my life in your hands. You better not be bullshitting me. And so, and he's literally, I can feel him. He's sticking rudder, just trying to keep the thing from stalling and trying to keep it level so we can generate. And he's in full afterburner at this point.
You're almost skimming the ocean at this point.
Yeah, the rat out went off. We're probably 35 feet off the ocean. Talking to the guys on the flight deck, they said, it's funny. So this happens, we climb away, and we go do the mission after that crazy takeoff. And we come back and land, and all the maintenance guys, the first thing they say when we get out of the jet, they're like, you guys have got balls of steel. They're like, all we could see of that damn jet was the top of the vertical stabilizers. They're like, that's how far down we were. They can see anything but the top of the 2 tails. Yeah. And they're like, you guys, how did you stay with it? And I'm like, to be honest, I was about to eject, but the fucking skipper said he had it. So I'm like, all right, you're the CO. You better not kill me. Yeah, the other reason why I wasn't real thrilled about ejecting was because we were so low, and I remember out of the corner of my eye seeing the side of the boat, like I'm looking at the hull, and I'm like, I can't remember who goes to the right, but I'm like, I don't really want to bounce off the side of the ship because that's how low we were.
No doubt, yeah.
And so that's the closest I've come to eject. I mean, I literally was reaching to pull the handle, and he's like, "Don't eject, I got it." Or no, I think he was just like, "I got it." That's all he said. Yeah. And so my hand was still on the handle, but I didn't pull it.
That's amazing.
And I was like, my hand's trying to pull it, and my brain's telling me not to, and I'm like,
So this actually leads to something I wanted to ask you about, Trey. This is a great transition. So you were, what we talked about earlier, you were a backseater, what's known as a Rio for F-14s or a Wizzo for the Super Hornets. Mm-hmm. Help us understand the mentality of a backseater versus the front seater.
Yeah, it's funny. That's a good question because to get into flight school at the time, there was a standardized test you have to take. And, I mentioned earlier I sucked at standardized tests. I had to take that damn thing like 4 times to get a high enough score. But it's funny because you get pilot scores and you get NFO scores. And so, technically I was called an NFO, a Naval Flight Officer. But in the Tomcat community, you're called a Rio. And so my pilot scores were always higher because part of the test is they ask you questions like, have you ever raced a car before? And so they're looking for at least at that time, they're looking for the mentality of a pilot to be somebody who's aggressive.
Yeah.
They're looking
risk taker.
Yeah. And they're looking for the mentality of an NFO to be somebody that's more calculating.
Yeah.
And so, so that's why I always scored better on the pilot scores because I was always, I used to race cars, like every stupid 16-year-old boy does. And so I always scored better as a pilot, but I couldn't become a pilot because my eyes were terrible.
Gotcha.
I've since had laser surgery so I can see without glasses, but I flew with contacts. But you could fly in the Navy in the back seat and have terrible vision as long as you're correctable to 20/20. But you had to fly with either contacts or glasses. And so the Navy wants the mentality of an NFO to be more calculating.
Sure.
But I can tell you in the Tomcat community, the more calculating people were normally kind of like ridden out of the community. I mean, the Tomcat community, I mean, everybody's expected to be aggressive.
Sure.
You came in the squadron in the morning, you kicked ass, you flew, and then you left and you went drinking and partied and I mean, that that part of Top Gun is pretty accurate with the Tomcat community.
Work hard, play hard.
Yeah, it's a work hard, play hard mentality. And so, in the Tomcat community, I mean, I know plenty of Rios who are, I flew with some pilots that were pretty calculating and reserved, and I was the aggressive one. Like, come on, dude, what the hell? Let's go. I was always really aggressive in the jet, but I was taught from an early age.
Yeah. In
my my aviation history or upbringing. I remember one of my commanders of my air wing mentioned this. He's like, you always want to be humble in the brief, humble in the debrief, but you want to be an aggressive maniac in the jet. Like I took that to heart, and so I was always very humble, and because you want to be humble in the brief and the debrief because that's where you learn.
Sure.
And so it's kind of one of those the idea that hey, shut up, leave your ego at the door, just be a sponge and listen and learn. But when you get in the jet, it's time to put your big boy pants on, and you better be aggressive because you're flying a $60 million fighter airplane.
Yeah.
That very few people will get to do, and so.
I'm glad you mentioned the brief and the debrief. From what I understand, that is one of the most important aspects of the weapons system school or Top Gun.
Oh yeah.
Being able to properly give a brief.
That's an important aspect of just flying fighters in the Navy.
So tell us about that. Explain it for us.
Yeah. So what Top Gun? Top Gun, you learn how to fight the plane better, but that's not really the primary mission of Top Gun. What Top Gun is there for is to teach you how to teach.
Gotcha.
Because you're going back to be an instructor.
Yeah.
And so
the force multiplier type thing.
Yeah. And so most of the classes, you learn, more in depth about weapon systems and tactics, but a lot of it's learning how to brief and debrief.
Yeah.
And so our debriefs at Top Gun for a 1-hour flight, I mean, they would last 8 hours.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So really picking stuff apart.
Oh, yeah. You'd start off you'd have the overall debrief with, the E2, or your controller. You'd have the guys who were playing the bad guys, the bandits, the Red Air. They would be in there. You'd have, and then you'd have all the friendly, the fighter guys.
Yeah.
And you'd have, the instructor, the Top Gun instructor for the flight. But it was always one of us students who briefed and debriefed the mission, because that was part of what we got critiqued on and graded on was how we briefed and debriefed also. And so. That first debrief was about an hour, maybe an hour and a half with everybody.
Sure.
and then you would kick the red air out, and then you'd have another hour and a half debrief with just the fighters and the controller.
The friendlies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk about comms,
Yeah.
Overall targeting decisions based on that kind of stuff. And then you kick the controllers out, and then you would have another hour and a half, 2 hour debrief with just the fighters.
Yeah.
And if it was a section, it was 2 of you, and one of the planes was the instructor. If it was a division, then it was 4 of you, and one of those planes was the instructor. And then when you finished the division, typically the division debriefs were the really long ones. Then you would do a short debrief with the 2 sections, because oftentimes the divisions broke up into 2 sections. So then you'd have another 30 minutes to an hour with the section. Then you would have your tape debrief. After you've already debriefed for 6 hours, then you'd go sit down with your tape, and then you'd review your tape with the instructor to go through all of your ICS communications, your display management, all the button pushing and selecting. Why are you doing that? What's this? And literally, if you farted in the jet, you would debrief how you farted.
Okay.
And
that's
so that's
real interesting.
Yeah. And so that's why, like, when you graduate Top Gun, you could probably take on the entire Russian Air Force and defeat them. Because you become a part of the jet. You and the jet are one. You can fight the hell out of it.
You are transitioning so well, Trey. I really appreciate this about you. But really quick, before we get to that, because I wanted to ask you about being one with the jet. So, you've seen both Top Guns. Some of the most famous scenes or some of the most enjoyable scenes are those debrief scenes. The question I have for you is, that's always the part in those movies where there's some jack-off making some snide comment or some sarcastic comment. So my question is, during those debriefs, is it serious, you're down to business, or is it kind of like a brainstorming session, you can kind of jaw around a little bit?
So, in the fleet, they're a little more kind of joking a little bit. When you're going through Top Gun, it's serious.
Down to business.
Yeah, it's all business in the debrief. But when you have the breaks, like when you kick the red air out, everybody will kind of joke around for a bit and kind of let's relax for a minute or two.
Sure.
But when you're actually in the debrief, it's total, like, you don't screw around, it's business.
Yeah.
In the fleet, you kind of joke around a little bit, but and the fleet debriefs probably, everything lasts about an hour, maybe hour and a half. And so that's like part of the hard part of being a Top Gun instructor too, because then you got to translate, okay, I don't have 8 hours now to do a debrief. So how do I highlight the important parts of the flight so that we can all learn? And the reason why it's different is because in the fleet, in the Navy, so in the Air Force, if you fly in the Air Force, that's all you do is fly.
Yeah.
In the Navy, you've got other collateral jobs you do. And so the last job I did, I managed the entire maintenance department. And so,
interesting.
Wow.
And so not only was I flying airplanes and teaching guys how to fly, I also managed, I think it was like 185 sailors, 12 jets, and tens of millions of dollars worth of parts.
Why does the Navy do it that way?
Money, I don't know. Save money, I guess, because the Air Force has separate maintenance squadrons, right? Navy squadrons, it's all contained. I think it's kind of a throwback to World War II, where it kind of builds camaraderie.
Sure.
Between the guys taking care of the jets and the guys flying them.
Yeah.
Because I did notice a difference between, like, the interaction at Hurlburt between the operational squadron and the maintenance squadron. There is kind of a different in the interaction.
Yeah.
As opposed to, hey, when I'm talking to the maintenance troops that I'm leading, I'm writing their evaluations.
You're invested in their success.
You've got a little more, and not to say the Air Force guys aren't invested, because they really care about the maintenance guys too. But it's different. It's a different feeling.
There's more of a personal stake in it. It sounds like with the Navy.
Yeah, I think it's just different when you're. I don't want to say it's more of a personal stake. It's just different. It's a different feeling.
Gotcha.
Is it because you're on a ship together, or?
Yeah, possibly because you're on a ship together, but you're also writing those guys' evals. As an officer, I'm signing those guys' evaluations.
How well do you get to know 180 guys? Pretty well?
Pretty well, yeah.
Okay.
When you in the Navy, you go from squadron to squadron, but as a junior officer, I would do tours as a division officer in I think I started off as a branch officer in the maintenance, where I'm leading 15, 20 electricians in the aviation electrician department. And then as I got more senior, I'd move up to a division officer where I'm leading, maybe 80 or 100 guys in the division. And then my last job was leading the entire maintenance department. By that point, I'd already been in the squadron for a year and a half.
Okay, so you already knew these guys.
So I already kind of knew them.
Gotcha.
And a lot of things like we do, like Navy's really big on leadership too, for the officer corps. And so, you're taught to lead by, walking around. And so, I spent a lot of time, just walking around the shops on the carrier, hanging out with guys for, 10, 15 minutes, finding out how, your wife and kids are doing.
Yeah.
It's a lot of that, so we do a lot of that, leadership by example too, where,
Yeah.
Really, feels like a family. And then I think that still carries on today in my teaching. I'm a professor at Lindenwood, and I just had a conversation with one of my students today because she's suffering from post-concussion syndrome.
Oh, sure.
And I've been pretty open about, my suffering from brain injuries.
She an athlete?
She was, yeah.
Gotcha.
She got it from playing high school sports.
Gotcha. Yep.
And so she's like, hey, can I ask you about your brain injuries? And so, yeah, I told her about mine and, about, hey, and I'm like, hey, maybe you should try doing this. But, I think I get that. And so I really got I try to make a personal connection with all my students too, by sharing. I don't get into the details of my story because I don't want my students to become my shrink, but I'll share details like, hey, I've been diagnosed with PTS and I'm not really suffering from it too much right now, other than, I'll have a flashback every now and then, but I can recover much more quickly. But I try to make that personal connection. I think I learned that from my time as an officer in the Navy, because that's how you're taught in the Navy,
I think that type of leader. I think that type of leadership is part of my style too. I mean, I can see that in myself, and I can appreciate that. I think that style, and I like the Navy does that. I think probably is because you're so close all the time that you have to have those connections. But it's a better way than managing by force, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like you get in some other branches. But yeah, I think the human aspect, especially in today's force, probably with the age brackets that we have now,
the personal touch. Yeah,
that personal touch, and they can read whether or not you're authentic or not, and they're going to read that real quick. And how hard are they going to work for you? Yeah. I mean, those guys are maintaining your aircraft, so you want to you want to have good relationship with the guys that are keeping you alive.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like every single naval officer was your model officer, because there were those guys that led by force, but those guys would, you would always hear from, like unless the troops would never dog those guys, but you'd always hear like and so I mean there were those guys, but typically in the aviation community, those guys didn't really progress well.
Sure.
From an officer
the
standpoint.
reputation preceded them.
Yeah, because, as you said, Jason, it's really all about, people want to, I mean, like when you're getting evaluated as an officer, they know, who the good officers are that really care about their sailors. And, because, they talk about how officers run the squadron. it's like this in every branch. The senior enlisted run the squadron.
Right.
And so like in the Navy, it's all the chiefs, senior chiefs, and master chiefs that run the Navy units.
Yep.
And, we do talk with the senior enlisted pretty candidly. And they'll, like when I was a maintenance officer, the maintenance master chief, he would come to me, he's an E9. He would come to me and be like, hey, sir, he'd pull me aside, like, hey, can you talk to Lieutenant so-and-so? He's kind of being a dick to, the engine department. And I'm like, got it, Master Chief, I'll take care of it.
Yeah.
And, so then it's like, hey, come aside. We're going to have a leadership discussion here.
I've recently heard someone talking about this and about, being a corporal or a sergeant is just as important at some level as your officer corps. You know what I mean? Because you're leading people from that rank, and it's pretty hard to get there, even though you're an NCO.
Yeah.
We've had at least two chief petty officers on. One was a coastie and one was a sailor, and they told us exactly what you're talking about, Trey. There's a certain level of respect that they have, even though they are enlisted.
Oh yeah,
they have those candid conversations with their officers quite often.
Yeah, and as junior officers in the Navy, at least in the naval aviation, as when I was, I showed up to my first squadron. It took me 2 years to get through flight school because I had a medical issue, but I just put on Lieutenant JG. But, normally you show up as an ensign, and you're told from day one, hey, shut up and listen to your chief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just, I know I've got Marine, I have Marine buddies who are infantry officers, and they're the same thing. You show up as a second lieutenant, and it's shut up and listen to your gunny.
Yeah.
And
if you want to survive.
Yeah.
And they usually have years on the officer as far as age and
and experience.
time in service. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, chiefs and gunnery sergeants in the Marine
20
Corps,
years,
they
18, 15.
Yeah, I mean, I knew some really shit-hot dudes that made it in 15, 16, but...
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hijack that part. I just thought that was really interesting because you can kind of correlate that in your private life, well, not private life, but in your after military life.
Sure.
And I really like that. I'm glad you mentioned that.
One last thing I wanted to ask about your career with fighter pilots and flying and being a backseater. And then I want to get into post-military. My dad, one of his hobbies is flying. He hasn't done it for a long time, but he loved it when he did, when he was younger. And I called him up before our interview, Trey, and I asked him, because he loves learning and watching things about the Top Gun school, the weapons system school. And something he wanted me to ask you is, and you kind of referenced it earlier, this being one with the jet. Help Jason and I, and help our audience understand what change occurs once you sit into the cockpit and you're up in the air. Do you continue being Trey, or do you change into something else?
That's a great question. The reason why I'm laughing is because just reminded me of one of my complaints from my wife and I are separated, but we're still married legally, and we've been married 28 years. So we've been through all this. And I remember when I was flying, we lived in Norfolk, and I remember, I would come home, and, when I'm at home, sometimes my brain would check out.
Yeah.
And it would just drive her nuts. And I remember her comment once was, "Can you please walk in this door and pretend like you're strapping into the jet?"
Interesting.
And so, and literally for me, it was like when I'd go down to the paraloft and start putting on my flight gear, it's like that change would just happen.
Yeah.
And, there were times like when we're, getting ready to go out on like combat missions where, they would have, we'd have, like heavy metal playing in the ready room, and the PR shop where our gear would have some kind of like music, and like it's like a football player putting on their gear in the locker room. It's like, a change happens. And so then, by the time you get in jet, and particularly like when you're on a flight deck getting ready for a combat mission, you've got your desert camo flight suit on, but you've still got green flight gear. So you're only bush in the desert. We used to laugh about that. If you have to eject, you're going to see this little bush running around.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But you go to the ready room. The last thing you do before you walk to the jet, you've already signed for the jet. You've already got your gear on. You walk back into the ready room with all your gear on your helmet, and you sign your pistol out. And we always flew with a 9mm SIG. It was a 228, a compact SIG with 2 clips. And I never flew with the clips in, but I actually knew a guy. I don't want to divulge his name, but he flew with a clip in and a round chambered, and had an accidental discharge in the ready room.
Oh man!
Turning his pistol back in. And it's like, I know in the Army that you have accidental discharges, and it's just like, man, I'm like, what are you going to eject in the middle of a firefight and come out shooting?
Guns ablazing.
Come out shooting in your 9mm SIG? I'm like, why are you flying with a round chamber? I didn't even fly with the magazines in. I'd put the gun in this pocket, and the magazines would be in this pocket.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was that last step, getting your weapon, was when the transformation completed?
No, I mean, I would say it's, I don't know, like even, for me, like when I was in combat, like that morning I'd get up and shower and shave, and I'd put on my tan flight, because when we'd fly around the boat, you'd always wear a green flight suit. Yeah. But when you're flying in country, you would always put on a khaki flight suit.
So it's almost like game day.
Yeah. And so even putting on that khaki flight suit in my stateroom, it's kind of like, even if I wasn't flying for 6 hours, it's like, I would still like.
Would you be in that headspace for the entire 6 hours?
No. I mean, I think a little bit, because, I'd still have I had my ground job, I'd have, so I'd have evals I'd have to work on. And so, you'd also prepare for the flight. You'd have to go by the intel center to get the intel. But, I think, once you kind of got done with the admin stuff and you're starting to prep for the flight, that's kind of like, I'm still kind of in this flight mode in my headspace. But when I start getting ready for the, getting the intel for the brief, that's when you're like, okay. And so then, I think, but, by the time you walk out on the flight deck and you're starting to strap in, I think you're already kind of in this mindset. I will say, though, one of the coolest feelings I love doing was, and this didn't happen often, but when you're the first launch of the morning, it was always really cool, particularly in the Tomcat community, because after the helo and the tanker, the Tomcats were always, they weren't always the first planes, but they were some of the first planes. But the first launch of the morning, the Tomcats were always lined up on the fantail, which is the very back of the ship. So, and when you'd walk out, there's no engines turning. And so you could walk out on the flight deck with just carrying your helmet. You didn't have to have protective headgear on unless there are actual engines turning. And so that was always a really cool feeling, walking out on the flight deck, particularly if it was like a beautiful morning.
Kind of cinematic.
Yeah, a little bit, and you're walking out with the pilot, and, you both got your helmets in your hands, and you're walking out to the jet, and you're like, all right, sweet.
We're pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm like, this is awesome.
Absolutely pretty cool, man.
With the exception of we did about 3 weeks, we did operations in the North Atlantic in December. But we're doing it with NATO operations. This was after my first deployment in 2000, so it was before 9/11. We're doing NATO operations with Sweden, the UK, and the carriers parked. We're like cruising around somewhere between the UK and, is it Iceland, I think? Yeah, Iceland. So we're like way up, we're not quite in the Arctic Circle, but we're pretty far up in the North Atlantic, and it's December. And so it's cold as shit. It's like 25 degrees outside.
Yeah.
And you would not believe how rough the North Atlantic is in the wintertime.
I've heard.
We have 40-foot swells. The aircraft carrier is getting thrown all over the place. People are puking. People are getting seasick inside the aircraft carrier. And the thing weighs 95,000 tons, and it's getting thrown around by the ocean.
Yeah.
And so we're getting these weather briefs, and they're like, hey, the outside air temp's 25 degrees. The sea surface temp is, 35. Expected survival time without a dry suit is, 10 seconds. Expected survival time
Crazy.
With a dry suit is 45 seconds. And so we're like, okay, there's no helo that's going to pick me up in 45 seconds. And so, and wearing a dry suit it's uncomfortable. It's like wearing a cup. If you played baseball and wore a cup, that's what wearing a dry suit feels like.
But your entire body.
But your entire body, not just your genitals.
Yeah.
And so we hated wearing them. And we were always like, Skipper, why do we have, we're going to live, nobody's going to live for 45, getting the halo in 45 seconds. Can we just not wear this? And he's like, no, you're wearing it, damn it. And so we would walk out on the flight deck, and it was always the first. This is where you didn't want to be the first launch of the morning, because it snowed the whole time, and and we fly in any weather, and so it's snowing. The jets are covered in snow. The wings are all iced over. We don't have de-icing, chemicals that we spray. Our de-icing are the engine exhaust for the other plane.
Oh my gosh!
And so I remember we'd walk out. You're just shivering. The poor enlisted guys on the flight deck, they got to be up there all damn day. And so, it's snowing, it's 25 degrees. You're trying to pre-flight the jet. And I always had the fingertips cut out in my gloves because I could feel the sticks and the switches better. But, I still wear fire retardant gloves. And so I'm like trying not to touch the jet too much with my fingertips, because I don't want it to be like Christmas Story.
Yeah, exactly.
Where my tongue gets frozen to the jet.
Right, exactly.
And so, we pre-flight the jet, we get in it. You have to de-ice the first, and so you literally have to, like the directors have to taxi jets and point engine exhausts at each other. And so we would do that until, our maintenance guys were like, hey, the wings are good. And then we would run our flight control checks, because you don't want to start moving flight controls when you have ice on the wings, because you're going to tear the flight controls up. So then we do the flight control checks. Everything's good. Then we're ready to launch. Launching and landing on an aircraft carrier with 40-foot swells, is actually I preferred doing this at night because you could not see the stupidness that was going on in front of the ship.
I'd be seasick as all get out. I wouldn't be able to do it.
Literally, you're on the catapult, and you're watching the bow do this. And so they would actually launch you when the bow is down and you're looking at a face full of water. Because in that 2 seconds that the jet is traveling down, you're on the upswell now and you get launched as you're moving up.
Crazy.
And so there are times where, we're sitting in tension, we've given the salute, and we're just in tension. The jet's coming down, like, all right, they're going to shoot us. In tension. Okay, the ship's coming back up. We haven't shot yet. And I jump on the radio, and I'm like, suspend Cat 1. And they're like, okay, you're suspended. Because if they launch you here, you're going to be flying through the water. Yeah. And you're going to flame both engines out and try ejecting underwater. It probably doesn't work well.
And so scary as heck, man.
And so it's even more fun coming into land because you can actually, the screws would come out of the water, and you could see the screws turning. And so I used to love jacking with the pilots. And so, we fly this visual pattern during the day, and you would take off and land and never say a word. It's crazy when you talk to people that fly.
Yeah.
Because when you fly around here, you're talking all the time.
Sure.
During the day at the boat, we take off and land and never say a word. Everything's visual and timing.
Yeah.
And so we were coming into land, and we'd be at the 90, which is basically 90 degrees a turn before you roll out on final. And we'd roll out, we've got everything configured, and the pilot's just flying instruments now, trying to hit wickets. I'd look over at the ship, and as the back end's coming out, I'm like, dude, look at that! They got the 2 and the 4 screw rigged today, and you can see them turning. I remember the pilot, like, excuse me for saying this, like, I remember this pilot. He was real reserved. And I said that, I'm like, dude, look at that, man. You can see the screws turning. They got 2 and 4 going right now. And he's like, shut the fuck up, Ragged.
You're freaking him out.
Yeah, he's like, I don't want to hear that.
Don't
Shut
tell
up, man.
me anything.
You're freaking me out. And so literally, like, you roll out on final and you're watching the back of the boat. You're like, okay, there's the screws. Okay, there's the flight deck. There's the screws. There's the flight deck. Hey, I got the flight deck. Good.
Man, oh, man.
Yeah, and
wow.
And so that's naval aviation for you, man. You fly in any weather. You're there to protect the free world from the Russian horde coming over the horizon.
I think some audience members might think you'd have to be crazy to want to do that. So there's one more story. I lied earlier, Trey. There's one more story because you shared it with Jason and I before we started recording that proves just how crazy you have to be, especially if you're a test pilot. Tell us about the story of going into space.
So I was an instructor at the Tomcat Training Squadron at the time, and we had an F-14 that actually 2 of my friends were in, and I was out on this training detachment in California. We're air-to-ground training detachment, and their jet caught on fire. And so they were able to get the jet back on deck and save the jet, but the jet was trashed because it was on fire, right? Yeah. But it's not like a car where you just throw it in the junkyard. They towed the thing down from California to Jacksonville, Florida, and spent a year rebuilding it.
Crazy.
And so, I think it was Northrop Grumman that rebuilt it.
Sure.
And so they got to turn it back over to the Navy now. And so to do that, you have to have 2 Navy aircrew come do what's called a maintenance check flight on it.
Yeah.
And there were 3 different maintenance flights that you had to do. This one was like, it was called a Pro A, where it's like you got to check everything. So in the back, I'm like checking every switch, every piece of equipment.
And they had you fly down from Norfolk
to
do this.
Yeah. So I was stationed in Virginia Beach. I had to get on an airliner with my gear, fly down, and then I met this pilot who I was going to do this flight with. And I found out, we're briefing the flight, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm a test pilot." And I'm like, "Sweet," because I know at this point, I know test pilots; they're all freaking crazy.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, "Awesome, this is gonna be fun." And so we briefed, he's like, "Hey, we're not going to need all the, we've got a full bag of gas in this thing." And he's like, "Oh, by the way, this doesn't have a chin pod on it because all fleet F-14s have a chin pod on it. It's a television camera. And the A and the B have a television camera. The D has a camera and an infrared tracking system. So this was a B, and the Bs have bigger engines. And so this is a B without a camera on the nose. So he's like, "Man, I've never flown an F-14 without a camera. I want to see what this thing can do." And I'm like, "All right, yeah, sure, test pilot guy, whatever."
Yeah.
And so we do the maintenance flight. We're done. And he's like, "All right, let's check this thing out." And so I'm like, "All right."
Now let's really fly.
Yeah, and so and the words you never want to hear from a pilot's, hey, watch this. And so that's kind of what I got was the hey, watch this, and I'm like, I'm doing the Mother Mary, full of grace. I'm like, God, this could be the end of it.
Oh man.
And so the first thing we do is, he's like, hey, I want to see if this thing can super cruise. And so he goes to military power, which is basically as fast as you can go without going to afterburners. And we busted the sound barrier just because we didn't have that camera on the nose. We were able to bust the sound barrier without going to afterburner.
Wow.
Normal fleet Tomcats, you had to go into afterburner to break through the sound barrier. So the thing could super cruise without that camera on the nose.
Yeah.
I was like, man, that damn thing never worked anyway. Just get rid of it. I'd rather super cruise and have this camera that works 20% of the time. And so we did that, and he's like, all right, let's see how high we can go. And I'm like, oh, this will be fun. And so then he goes to full afterburner and parks the nose up at like 30 degrees nose high, and we just start climbing.
Man.
And I'm like, all right, 30,000 feet. Yeah, I've been that high. 40,000. Okay, I've been that high a few times. I'm like, 45, I don't think I've been there. I'm like, 50, definitely never been to 50, and we're still climbing. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, where the hell are we going to stop? And so we hit 53, and it's like, all right, we're having a hard time. And we're just starting to get to 54, and I can start. So in the jet engines, as far as I know, all jet engines have this, but in the Tomcat, they have temperature sensors in the rear stage of the engines, and it's called EGT, exhaust gas temperature. I can't remember what the number is. It was like, I don't know, 820 but when the temperature gets below like 820 Fahrenheit or something like that, the auto relight will kick on, and that's basically the igniters in the combustion section will start firing. And while you're introducing fuel to basically try to reignite basically it's like, hey, it's getting cool in here. The combustion's not working.
Yeah.
You can actually hear that in the jet. And so I'm hearing this beep, beep, beep. And I'm like, damn, that's the auto relight. And I'm like, hey, dude, the auto relight's starting to go off now at 54. We're just starting to kiss 54,000. And I'm looking out of the canopy, and I'm starting to see the curvature of the earth. and the sky above me is black. And the sky to the side of me is black. And I'm like, holy crap, we're not wearing pressure suits. I've got my G suit on, and that's it. And I normally don't fly with my mask on. I only fly with a mask on when we're, doing dogfighting, if we're doing intercepts.
Sure.
If I'm doing something I have to talk, like close air, if we're doing a mission, I would fly with my mask on. If we were just kind of cruising somewhere, I always had my mask dangling, because I hated wearing it. And so, here I've got my mask dangling, and I'm starting to feel a little lightheaded, and I'm like, damn, I'm starting to get hypoxic. And I look down at the cabin pressure, and the cabin pressure is reading like normally. I think it was scheduled to hold at like 10 or 12,000 feet for normal altitude ranges. I think that at this point, it was reading like 18 or 20 or something. And I'm like, shit, that's why I'm hypoxic. and so I put my mask on, and I turned the oxygen on. In the both in the Tomcat and the Hornet, you controlled your own oxygen in your cockpit through your mask. And so, I'd like put my mask on and turn the oxygen on. I'm like, okay, I'm not hypoxic anymore. Sweet. But that we actually had to go through that kind of training. So I had to learn what hypoxia. I'm like, I've been hypoxic. You have to learn what it feels like. And so that's if you've seen Officer and Gentleman, that's what they do. And we did the same thing.
Okay.
Because you got to learn what it feels like.
No, that's one of my favorite movies right there.
Yeah. And so
did the pilot at any point finally realize, I need to go back down to earth?
No, he would have kept trying to kill us. And so, after I make the auto relight comment, he's like, yeah, isn't this cool? He's like, hey, look at the controls. And I look to the left and right, and I look in the mirrors behind me at the vertical stabilizers, and everything's just going every which way. And so I know he's up there kicking the rudder pedals and just moving the stick around. We call it stirring the soup. And the flight controls are just moving every which way. If you did that in a normal operating regime, the jet would go out of control.
Yeah.
But because we're at 54,000 feet and there's not a whole lot of oxygen, oxygen molecules,
It has no effect,
Yeah,
essentially.
it's just there's not
So
enough.
he was like, "Mom, I'm riding with no hands,"
yeah,
kind of thing.
so literally, we're just kind of falling at this point. We're just falling out of the
crazy.
sky.
It's crazy.
And so it gave me a newfound respect for those U-2 and the SR-71 dudes that flew at like, I don't know, whatever they were at, 70, 80,000 feet.
If you wouldn't have said anything, he'd still be orbiting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so out of that, we figured out, all right, 54 is probably the top of the, the top of the ceiling for the Tomcat.
Sure.
I don't even know what Unclass published was. But yeah, I figured out 54 is actually the ceiling of the Tomcat.
That's a great story.
But then out of that, we nose it over, and we go 30 up was a good number. Let's do 30 down, and let's go to full afterburner and see how fast we can get. And we only got to Mach 1.95, and that's because the airspeed indicator in the F-14, it was a dial, and it pegs at Mach 1.95. But I know we broke Mach 2 because that thing was pegged for probably a good 20 seconds.
Insane.
And we're over the ocean, so everybody's like, what's it like going Mach 2? I'm like, I don't know. I thought the jet was going to fall apart because the airflow over the jet is just so violent at Mach 2. At that altitude, the airspeed for Mach 2 is maybe 1,200 miles an hour.
Wow.
1,000, maybe 1,200. But as you get lower and lower, the air gets thicker.
Yeah.
The airspeed to break the sound barrier increases. So at sea level, it's 714 miles per hour. And so, I don't, people are like, how fast do you think you're? I'm like, I don't know, maybe 1,000 miles an hour, I would guess. I don't know for sure, but yeah, I've probably been 1,000 miles an hour in, Mach 2 and an F-14.
Thanks for sharing that story.
Man, that's incredible.
I got a real kick out of that when you told us before we started.
After that, I'm like, I never want to fly with a test pilot again.
I don't blame you.
First and last.
Yeah.
That's such a great story, Trey. I want to take a bit of a turn here. Earlier, you mentioned something that really caught my attention. You mentioned that there would be times you would come home and your wife would ask you to basically act like you're entering the cockpit, act like you're going on a mission. I want to see that guy come into the house. Tell us the process of finding out that you had PTSD, finding out that you had anxiety, depression, all of these things that were going on in your life. And changing who you were. So
I think my wife knew something was going on after that third deployment with Special Forces. I think I mentioned earlier I came home for R&R, and she mentioned like, you don't seem right. And like I knew by that fourth deployment, I was like climbing the walls. I mean, I flew 192 combat missions, 460 catapult shots and traps. And, like I said earlier, we were talking, I lived in a combat zone for over 2 years. And so it's just all that time of getting shot at, killing people, watching guys, die. It's like it starts wearing on you. And so that last deployment was a real struggle for me. And everybody's always like, well, how do you, did you know when you wanted to get out? I'm like, I knew the exact flight, the mission. It was like mission, 185 or something. And I'm flying with, I'm a senior 04 in the squadron by this point. So if you're not familiar with Navy rank, I'm senior major basically, and the next year I was up for 05. I've got over 3,000 flight hours by this point, and I'm flying with a new guy. And, we get off the carrier and the rat out doesn't work in the Super Hornet. And the rat out for what we're going to do, we're going in country, but it's not a real important piece of equipment. And in the F-14, I took a lot worse in Afghanistan, into the mountains. I took a lot worse. And so we get airborne, and I can't decide. And it's my call because I'm, even though the pilot's in charge of the plane, it's my call if we take it in country or not because I'm the mission commander. I could not make a decision. And this was like the first time, I'd never been, like when you're flying in combat and you're in Top Gun and you're trained to make decisions. Yeah. It's like,
you have to.
Yeah. And, your life and other people's lives depend on it. I could not freaking decide. The boat's asking me like, hey, what are you guys doing? The airborne spare, who was the commanding officer of another Super Hornet squadron, is asking me like, hey, what are you guys going to do? And I just can't decide.
What was it like in that moment?
It was really weird because like it was foreign to me, like not being able to make a decision on if we should take the jet or not. And so finally, I was just finally, and even the pilot's like, hey, Raggett, what the hell? What are we going to do? And finally, I'm like, no, we're not taking it. And I'm just like, spare, go ahead. We're not going. We're going back to land. And we go back and land. And even the guys in the squadron were like, man, what the hell's the deal with you? You're all right? And, all those guys knew about my special forces deployment, and they knew all the flying. And by this point, so to kind of tell the story, so there's zero drinking allowed on Navy ships, unless on the aircraft carrier, we would have Steel Beach picnics, where if you've been at sea for 60 days and you're going to be at sea for like another 2 weeks after that, so 80 days, they will stop flight ops for a day and they'll have a Steel Beach picnic. They move all the planes they can down to the hangar bay, and they open up the flight deck. They bring out grills, and they actually have beer on the ship, and each person who's 21 gets 2 beers, which is stupid, right? Like 18-year-old sailors can't drink on the ship.
Even though they're doing the same work.
Yeah, even though they're doing the same work, and there's everybody else. And so otherwise, though, you're not allowed to drink on the ship. And the U.S. Navy is the only Navy that's like that. The British Navy, the French Navy, the Spanish Navy, man, they drink on the ship all the time. And we used to love... Like, every now and then we do stuff for the French, and we're always like, I want to go to the French ship. I want to go drink really nice fine wine on the French ship. But, this last deployment, before I left, I knew I was struggling. I actually went to the package store on base and bought, I think I bought a case of Jim Beam, and I bought 12 Listerine bottles, and I dumped out all the brown Listerine and filled it up with Jim Beam, put the top back on and like cellophane the cap. And then I'd made boxes, and I told my wife, ship one of these out every 2 weeks for the deployment. And so I'd come back from missions and just start drinking whiskey on the ship illegally. But, then I'd wash the, Listerine bottle out, and I'd, put a little soap in it and try to get rid of the smell and just throw it in the trash. And so, I was drinking heavily on the deployment. And so that's why I was like, man, I'm not doing well. Yeah. So after that mission, I don't want to say it was like that scene in Top Gun. I didn't walk in and throw my wings on the CO's desk. But, I walked in, I told my commanding officer, I'm like, hey, I need to meet with you in the XO. We call him the skipper. And he's like, why, what's going on? I'm like, I need to meet with you guys in your stateroom if that's okay. And he's like, yeah, come on. So, he calls the XO. I'm like, hey, Raggett needs to talk to us in my stateroom. And I knew both the CO and the XO well. The XO was one of my instructors. He's actually my pilot for my first Tomcat flight in the training squadron. Wow. And the CO was one of my department heads when I was a junior officer in my first squadron. And so we made a deployment together. Yeah. So I knew both guys really well. And we walk in, and I'm just telling them, I'm like, guys, I'm not doing well. I'm like, I think I'm getting out. I can't do this anymore. I'm struggling. And we had like a 2-hour conversation with them. And I told them, I'm like, look, I'm drinking on the ship just to cope. I can't do this anymore. I'm just letting you guys know I'm dropping my letter. I'm getting out. And I partially did that too because, at that level, in the Navy, it's kind of we call it a fit rep race. So an officer in the military, you get fitness reports. Sure. At that level, it's you and another 04, and one of you is going to get the number 1, and that's the person that's got a really good chance of being a CO. Gotcha. The other person's going to get the number 2, and you're going to go do something else. That's kind of how it works. And so, they didn't say, hey, you're getting this or that. So I had no idea if I was going to get the number 1 or 2, but I'm just like, look, I'm letting you guys know this now because I don't want to take a number 1 fit rep from somebody that you guys, may feel like may also be a good fit to be a CO. Yeah. And so I told him I still had another year and a half left in the squadron. And I told him I'm getting out. I can't do this anymore. And so, we get back from the deployment, dropped a letter. I get out and, I'm talking to my wife and she's like, yeah, and we're both like, I just need to get out. Once I get out, I'm going to be better. So I get out, we move here. And my wife gets pregnant with twins. And so we're expecting, and, for a period, like I was just focused on her and the kids, and everything was really well. I just started a new job working at a manufacturing plant in St. Peter's, and everything's going pretty well. We're getting the house ready for the kids. And then, after we have the kids, things start going downhill, and we're like, maybe it's just the manufacturing supply chain job. So I quit that. I go back to graduate school. I start teaching part-time while I'm finishing up my PhD, but I'm still not doing well. And my dad passes away in 2018, in that summer. And by 2019, I was a blazing hot mess. Just PTS was just awful. And it's just standard stuff you hear. I I can't walk into a Schnucks or a Walmart without losing my mind. Just the fear of going outside of the house. Always keeping the lights out in the house. I'm drinking, 2 to 3 bottles of wine a night. I kind of laugh about this now, and I always tell people now I was drinking 3 bottles of wine, not 3 glasses. Yeah. But I always tell people, I'm like, hey, at least it was wine, right? I'm looking out for my figure. Wine's low in calories. I'm like,
Sure.
If I was drinking that much beer, I'm like, holy shit, I'd have a heart attack.
Yeah.
So I always laugh about that. But yeah, I'm just drinking a ton. I'm constantly yelling at the dogs, at my kids, at my wife. It was fall of 2019 is when that's when I went to the VA and I was diagnosed. At the time, I wasn't diagnosed with severe PTSD yet. It kind of got worse as I started doing this treatment with the VA.
Interesting.
And so, yeah.
Medications, prescription medications?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's the VA's playbook, right?
Yeah.
So I ended up initially, I'm like, I'm not doing medications. And so I started doing the talk therapy, and I went from like one therapist to another. And, to me, sitting in somebody's office, this doesn't really work. It kind of helped a little bit, but then I got really bad again. I think it was maybe 6 months later. I'm like, I probably need to start trying medications. So I go to see the psychiatrist. I end up on the max amount of Zoloft I can take, max amount of Trazodone, the max amount of Prazosin for my nightmares.
Wow.
I end up moving down to the basement bed because I'm, rolling over in the middle of the night, kicking my wife. We're not doing well in our marriage because, I'm just a raging asshole from my post-traumatic stress. Yeah. And at the time, we're just, it's PTS. And so I end up in the basement. Nightmares are terrible. Everything that, you've probably heard before from veterans, nightmares, insomnia. Literally there are nights where I'm just in my closet, just, crying because, it's 3 a.m. and I can't sleep, and I'm trying to keep the nightmares away, and I'm just drinking to, keep the nightmares away. And so, I'm on this medication, and it's not working. And I've tried. I go to Home Base, which is a program in Boston. It's like a 2-week outpatient for PTS, and
Sure.
I try that. That doesn't work. I'm seeing 3 different therapists, and I end up suicidal. And this was the first time that I was on my way home. I remember leaving a therapy session, and I'm on my way home. I've already got the letter in my head. I'm on my way home to get my pistol.
Wow.
And my therapist knew something was up, and he asked me, like, hey, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. And so he called my other therapist, who at the time was a therapist at the vet center at Scott Air Force Base. And that guy calls me, and I think he was told, like, hey, I don't think Trey's well. You need to call him. And he called me, and he's like, hey, how you doing? And I'm like, good. I'm going home to get my gun. Wow. And he's like, what do you think about coming out to Scott Air Force Base for the day? And so he convinced me. First he got me to drive off the road and park. Sure. And then he convinced me to drive out to Scott. And that was while I'm on all these psychotropic medications that are supposed to keep me from doing this, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, this stuff's not working. And I told the psychiatrist to get me off this, and standard. Well, let me try something else. And I'm like, no, I want off this stuff. I don't like the way it feels. It's obviously not working. I was just suicidal. Yeah. And I went through about a 3-day period where it was pretty sketchy.
Touch and go.
Yeah. And I didn't tell my wife about this either. So I still knew the combo to the gun safe at the time. And she didn't know I was suicidal. I get better. At this point I've switched therapists, and I start coming off the meds. The psychiatrist at the VA takes me off of, that level. I was on that high level of SSRIs for almost 2 years. Yeah. And wow. So, and I get taken off of those in about, I think it was 6 weeks. And I end up in an awful case of SSRI withdrawals that, as far as I know, the medical community still does not formally recognize SSRI withdrawals. But basically what I experienced was brain zaps, where it was like these constant flashes of like a 240-volt cable being hooked up to my brain and just having these constant surge of electrons through my brain. And even worse than that was my skin felt like it was on fire, literally from head to toe. And I would just spend hours sitting in a cold shower in my basement just trying to get relief from the my feeling my skin's on fire. And that was by about August of that same year. I think that was 2022. I was suicidal again. I just wanted relief from the pain. I couldn't take the PTS anymore. I couldn't take the SSRI withdrawals. And I'm just like, there's nothing else out there. I'm drinking a shit ton. I wanted the pain to stop. And so my new therapist starts talking to me about alternative therapies that are out there. And he's like, hey, there's veterans that are starting to do things like psychedelics and some other stuff.
Sure.
So we start talking about that. I actually know a veteran from this veterans group who had just gone on an ayahuasca retreat.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, why don't you tell me about that? So he tells me about this ayahuasca retreat. And so I end up going on an ayahuasca retreat, and I do a couple of ceremonies. And, it's funny, the SSRI withdrawals stopped. I mean, like the morning after I did my first ayahuasca journey, I had no more brain zaps and no more skin on fire, and I haven't had a problem with it since. And so I come back from that, and I'm feeling better for a while, and I'm like, this is feeling good. And at this point, I also get my hands on microdose of psilocybin, which are mushrooms. And so at this point, I start microdosing with psilocybin as well. Sure. Because the whole idea is this, neuroplasticity in my brain. If I can keep my brain in this neurogenetic state where I'm, trying to heal my brain, hey, maybe I can fix it. And so I'm microdosing with psilocybin now, and I'm doing pretty well for 6 months, 9 months. And it was this period that I started working on my dissertation again. And so while I'm going through all this post-traumatic stress and anxiety and depression that I discover later is from these brain injuries that I've got from all the traps and firing the gun, I'm able to finish my dissertation and defend it basically because of the help of psychedelics. Being able to put my brain in this temporary state where I can focus, I can concentrate just enough to get, finished writing my dissertation.
What was your dissertation?
So I've got a PhD in political science, and it was on I looked at the legislative process in the state of Missouri, and I looked at basically points of influence that we've created because of term limits on Missouri legislators, low pay. It's the whole idea we don't want professional legislators.
Sure.
Well, that's fine, but passing a bill is not something any Tom, Dick, or Harry off the street can do. Yeah. You need to have people to know how the system works.
And the consequences of laws.
Yeah, and if you're not going to pay people to do that professionally, then that knowledge is going to reside with lobbyists and interest groups. And that's here in Missouri, that's where a lot of the knowledge is now. A lot of lobbyists are former legislators.
Yeah.
And that are making 4 times what they were making as a legislator. Because I think they just upped the pay now to $38,000, maybe $40,000 for a legislator.
Wow.
And they've got to have they've got to have a main job.
They all do. Yeah. They all do. And so
that's a great topic.
Yeah.
I just out of curiosity, I appreciate you sharing that, Trey.
Yeah. So that was my dissertation. I'm able to get it defended, and I earned my PhD in the middle of this craziness. But at the same time, it's putting my family through this awful hell. It's a roller coaster.
Yeah.
My kids end up, on therapy, off and on because of it. My wife's now on ended up on therapy. I end up sliding back downhill again really badly. And so about a year ago, I'm drinking 3 bottles of wine again. My wife and I are fighting worse than ever before. And, we have this awful fight in front of the kids. She's just like, I can't do this anymore. I want you out of the house. You need to leave. And so, I get in the car, I'm wasted. I go, driving off somewhere. I didn't care if I got a DUI or died.
Sure.
I'm just, and so I'm driving off. I spend the night in my car in a parking lot somewhere. And I end up coming back to the house at 6 or 7 in the morning because I didn't know where else to go. Yeah. Because I'm really suffering. My post-traumatic stress wasn't as bad as it was before, but it's still bad. But my anxiety and depression are off the charts. Yeah. So I end up coming back home, and my wife's like, look, you can stay here for a little bit, but, you're moving out of the house. I can't do this anymore. We need a separation. And so that's where we're at right now. But for that, there was about a 4-month period from November to February of this year where that's the longest. I was suicidal for 4 months, off and on. Not every day. I'd have some good days and bad days,
Sure.
but I'd have weeks where, 4 or 5 days I'm just fighting suicide. And the only thing that kept me from doing it were my kids, because I know suicide is generational. Yeah. I've been told that by therapists, and I'm like, I can't do that to my kids. And my love for my kids is what kept me here. And so, I'm struggling with this. And, I remember, I think it's December, I learned about this neurologist who's doing some more advanced brain scans on SEALs. He'd been doing them on the East Coast SEAL teams for about 2 years. And he's basically looking at the cellular level of the brain. And, hey, is there a chance that we're doing damage to the actual cells? Because all the military is looking at right now, like from TBIs,
Sure.
like I had MRIs done because I had a TBI. And I reported it, I think a couple of years ago. I didn't report it while I was in because I wouldn't have been flying anymore.
Yeah.
And so, I get MRIs done and they're like, oh, all your glands look good. And so, all medicine does for brain injuries is, oh, you had a TBI, let's look at your glands. And so, nobody really knows anything about how the brain works at the cellular level and why are people getting CTE and we can't diagnose CTE. So I ended up talking to this neurologist and I'm telling him all my symptoms. And he's like, I'm pretty sure you've got some pretty severe brain damage at the cellular level from all these traps, pulling G's. And he just started talking to a friend of mine who at the time was the current CO of TOPGUN. And he went through, I knew the guy because he went through TOPGUN the class before I did. He was a Hornet pilot. And this guy saw him at a conference talking to him and heard about this research he was doing with SEALs and started talking to him because in the Navy fighter community, we just had 3 guys that I know who committed suicide from severe anxiety and depression. And one of the guys was one of my students in the F-14 training squadron, so I knew him pretty well. That hit all of us really hard. And so he's like, look, there's something going on here, and we don't know why these, guys are ended up, in this place where they want to commit suicide. And so unbeknownst to the Navy, he actually goes to TOPGUN and starts scanning the brains of some TOPGUN instructors and finds, some of these guys have some of the same brain injuries. I told this guy my symptoms, and he's like, I'm about 99.9% sure you've got these brain injuries. He's like, can you make it to Little Creek in 4 days? And I'm like, and this is in Virginia Beach. And I'm like, no, I live in St. Louis. And I don't have a lot of money, so I can't just jump on a plane.
Sure.
Because he wanted to scan me. So he was never able to scan me, but he's like, I'm pretty sure you're suffering from these brain injuries just based on the symptoms you're telling me. Yeah. And he actually starts talking to my therapist, and my therapist is sharing with him. I do all that disclosure crap. And so my therapist is sharing with him how I'm doing with my post-traumatic stress and, the fact that I'm not suffering from that as much now as I am anxiety and depression. Yeah. And that's pretty common for brain injuries. Basically what this neurologist tells me is you're kind of on your way to CTE. You've experienced these and his hypothesis is that it's similar to what hockey players and football players are experiencing, where they don't lose consciousness, but it's just concussive blow after concussive blow after concussive blow that builds up over 5, 10, 15 years. Yeah. You do that a couple of times to the brain and you tear a couple of neural pathways. Well, the brain can just build new ones. But there's only so much real estate, in your head, right? Yeah. So after a while, your brain can't rewire, and then you start suffering from anxiety, depression. And so that's where I was at. I remember I checked myself into John Cochran on the day after Christmas because that was one of my worst days. And so, my therapist is like, hey, I just read this article from Stanford about Ibogaine. They went down to they sent 30 Special Forces guys to Ambio to do Ibogaine.
That was one of the articles I was going to reference.
Yeah.
Stanford Medicine.
Yep. Yeah. And so, he talks about this article. He sends it to me, and I read it, and I'm like, damn. I think I need to try to get to Mexico to do Ibogaine. I apply to Ambio. I apply to the mission within. And I'm just applying to every place I can get into. And you'd be shocked at how many fly-by-night Ibogaine places are popping up in Mexico now because there's a big demand for it, right?
Yeah.
Especially since Rogan talked about it. It's capitalism.
And Sean Ryan.
Yeah, that's right. Sean Ryan's talked about it too in his podcasts. Yeah. And so I'm trying to get into these places. I'm trying to get the money because the price ranges anywhere from $4,000 to $20,000.
Wow.
Depending on where you go. Some of these places are marketing like the spa-type experience. Yeah. I can tell you, if I do an Ibogaine, I don't give a shit about being in a spa. Because Ibogaine, it's rough. So, I apply with Vet Solutions, who caters to Special Forces, but they do also treat conventional guys and first responders too, if they have the space and the money. So I apply to Vet Solutions, I apply to Heroic Hearts, and I haven't heard anything from anybody. And I'm pretty desperate by this point. I mean, I'm literally like every other day fighting suicide. And so I start trying to find money. My therapist works out to find money from Songs for Soldiers to send me here locally to do ketamine.
Gotcha.
Just to give me some relief from the suicide.
Gotcha.
But I can't get into the ketamine clinic quick enough, and I also can't find anybody to drive me. And so I talked to Songs for Soldiers, and I'm like, hey, can I take this money and go to Mexico and do Ibogaine instead? And I end up talking to Dustin, the president of Songs for Soldiers, and I talked to the ketamine clinic. He'd actually already paid the ketamine clinic for me. And so I call the ketamine clinic, and I'm like, hey, look, doc, I'm not going to come. I can't find somebody to drive me. Can you please do me a favor and just refund Songs for Soldiers the money? Because I want to try to go to Mexico and do Ibogaine. And so awesome dude. He's like, yeah, no problem, man. I'll refund it. Good. I get the money refunded. I'm like, hey, dude, hey, Dustin, here's the money. And Dustin's
that shows how quick Dustin works, by the way, which is funny.
Yeah, he's super. I mean, he makes stuff happen.
He's fantastic.
And so I go to my family and ask for the other half of the money, and my family and friends like, hey, man, here you go. And so basically on my good days where I wasn't thinking about, starting my 9mm, I'm trying to find money to go to Mexico to do Ibogaine. And so I'm able to raise the money. I reapply at Vets, and I'm like, hey, I've got my own money. I just need a spot. Sure. And literally, I think like 3 days later, I get a call from Lori Camper, who's kind of the program manager at Vets. And she's like, hey, we got a spot going in, I think, 8 days.
Amazing.
She's like, can you make it? She's like, you haven't really done integration. I'm like, look, I've done psychedelics before. I've been working with a therapist. I'm good on the integration. Just, I'm going. And so, literally a week later, I'm on a plane to San Diego, and 2 days after that, I'm in Mexico doing Ibogaine.
Where in Mexico is this? This is Baja? Or?
Tijuana, yeah.
Tijuana.
So Baja, yeah.
Gotcha.
And Ambio's got, I think, 4 or 5 houses now in Tijuana.
Gotcha.
Where they do Ibogaine. They've got kind of a vets only house, which is the one I went to.
Sure.
But they've got other houses that they try to reserve more for civilians, but they also feed vets into those as well. And so I'm actually going back down there again in June.
Very cool.
Because I've still, I still have got the brain injuries.
Sure.
I still have problems with memory. And so, I'm going back down for another Ibogaine journey on my own next June. But I purposely signed up for one of the houses with civilians because I want to go through with civilians.
And integrate a little bit.
See what it's like and work on integration with civilians.
I wanted to mention a few things, and then I want to get into your journey with Ibogaine.
Mm-hmm.
There's been so much media on this, and you referenced this, Trey. It's really popping up. It's really growing in popularity and people's curiosity. The Joe Rogan experience, Joe Rogan's talked about in his show. Sean Ryan has gone through Ibogaine therapy. He's talked about it on his show. 60 Minutes has done multiple stories on it. 60 Minutes did a story in 2019 on, this was a little bit different, but it was on stellate ganglion block shots.
Yep.
Last week, Tonight with John Oliver, one of my favorite shows in 2023, did a story on psychedelic assisted therapy for PTSD. You mentioned ayahuasca, microdosing. Okay, so with all that, it's out there. Information is out there. People know about it. People are interested about it and in it. Tell us about your journey on Ibogaine.
So I don't like sharing too much of my psychedelic experiences because I found that each person has their own unique experience, and I've actually found it creates anxiety with people, especially people who are doing it for the first time, because they're like, "Oh, I heard my buddy,
experience this.
Yeah. Why am I not experiencing it?" And it creates anxiety in people. And so, going through Ibogaine, I'm always pretty open with it. I've done all the, I always say main, but I've done most, let me rephrase, I've done most of the natural occurring psychedelics. I've never done peyote. I've never done mescaline. But I've done ayahuasca, psilocybin, 5-MeO-DMT, and Ibogaine. And of all those, Ibogaine is by far the biggest ass kicker. The psychedelic experience, so LSD's got a pretty long I've never done LSD, but it's got a pretty long psychedelic experience. LSD, by the way, is the most studied psychedelic out there. We studied it here in the U.S. for 30 years, I think.
On military members as well, in fact.
Yeah. And, the studying stopped with Nixon's war on drugs in the 70s, but we know everything about flood doses or heroic doses of LSD. We don't know anything about microdoses with LSD. And so I'm like, man, it'd be pretty interesting to study microdosing with LSD
Sure.
to see what that does. But LSD's got a pretty long psychedelic effect. It can get up there at 8 hours. Psilocybin, ayahuasca, they're 4 to 6. 5-MeO-DMT is super quick. 5-MeO-DMT, you have to be careful because if you take too much of it, you can end up in this weird state and you could be psychedelic for longer, but it's like a really weird it's a dangerous psychological state to be in. So there's kind of a sweet spot of, how much 5-MeO-DMT you want to do at one time. And if you do that, you're psychedelic for 20 to maybe 45 minutes. It's pretty quick.
Will that typically be done the day after you've had the Ibogaine?
2 days after.
It's 2 days after.
Yeah, so Ibogaine is interesting because Ibogaine, you're psychedelic for 8 to 12 hours.
Okay.
If you take a normal dose. And what Ambio does, and Ambio is super safe, by the way, and Ibogaine, you have to be careful because Ibogaine, people have died from it. Ibogaine is the only psychedelic that has a physiological risk to it.
Wow.
If you take too much of it, it drops your heart rate.
Yeah.
And people have crashed from taking too much Ibogaine, basically going into cardiac arrest,
Yeah.
and they die from a heart attack.
Wow.
And so you have to be careful when you take Ibogaine.
It needs to be monitored and supervised.
The other psychedelics, I drank enough ayahuasca to kill a horse, and you just throw it up. You don't, nothing happens.
Sure.
Same thing with mushrooms. You could eat a whole field full of mushrooms, and you're just going to throw up.
Sure.
But Ibogaine, you can actually, no kidding, have a heart attack. Wow. So, it's like one of those things where like, hey, you want to go do mushrooms on a couch? Go ahead.
Sure.
If you do Ibogaine, you need to be in a medical setting.
Yeah.
And Ambio is top notch. Doctors, nurses, like when we did Ibogaine, there was one doctor and 4 nurses in the house the whole time. In the ceremony room, we're all hooked up to EKGs. There's a licensed nurse or doctor in the room the whole time watching the EKGs. But the process, it's pretty intense. So Ibogaine is the only psychedelic where, at least at Ambio, and I think the other professional places do this too, but you get a PICC line stuck in your arm and you have that PICC line for 3 days because they just pump you full of IVs.
Sure.
Because, I was freaking Linda Blair on Ibogaine. I threw up, no shit, constantly for 14 hours.
Wow.
Just constant throwing up. And they have that PICC line so they can just pump IVs in to keep fluid in me. They're pumping some anti-nausea medication in me, which helped for like 20 minutes. And then I'd start throwing up again. So, when you do Ibogaine, at least at Ambio, you get 4 pills, and you do one every like 30 minutes. And then after the 4th, you go into the ceremony room, and each person's got their own mattress. And so, the procedure is, you lay down, and you can normally tell when people, I've done enough psychedelics in public settings where you can, a lot of psychedelics, you may experience some nausea.
Sure.
And, some people don't like that. The way it's looked at in the psychedelic world is you're expunging your demons. That's kind of the way I always looked at it. I'm like, man, I enjoy throwing up because I'm getting this shit out of me.
It's a physical manifestation of it, essentially.
Of what you're dealing with. Yeah. And so, you can normally tell when it starts hitting people because you'll hear somebody throw up. Actually, my buddy next to me, at Ambio, they have these mirrors that are propped up against the wall. And when you do Ibogaine, you have a mask over your eyes. Yeah. When you do Ibogaine and psilocybin, you can go internal as well. But when you do Ibogaine, you go inside. Like it's meant to go, like you want to go deep into your subconscious self. Sure. It actually removes the barrier between your subconscious and conscious brain. And so, you want to go in and dig in deep and deal with, your demons. Yeah. But they tell you hey, you can, leave your blindfold up and you can sit there and look at this mirror. And when you start seeing your face melting off, the Ibogaine's kicking in. And so I'd already...
Or you keep your blindfold on.
Yeah. I'd already seen all that with ayahuasca. I'd seen the bones in my hands and, you see some crazy shit when you do psychedelics. And so I'm just like, so I just put my mask on and laid down and started trying to meditate. I'm like, yeah, whatever. I've seen my face melt off. But the guy next to me, he was 2 places down. I hear him, I see him sitting up, and then I hear him say, "Oh fuck no!" And then he just lays down and puts his blindfold on. And so I'm like, he just saw his face melt off. And this was his first time he ever did Ibogaine, or he ever did any psychedelic. And so he just saw his face melt off. And so I know it's starting to kick in for everybody. I hear another guy throwing up, and I'm like, everybody's feeling it. I'm still not feeling shit. And this happened too with ayahuasca. And psilocybin, I have this hard time getting into it, but then once I get into it, it just takes me a little time, I guess, my body to process it. And so Ambio had said, like, hey, this happens sometimes. People can't get into it after 4 pills. And so if that happens and you want to take a 5th pill, we will let you take one more 5th pill, but we're not giving you any more because you will then be getting into the cardiac realm. And Ambio actually makes the pills specific to you based on your body weight, because there's a ratio of Ibogaine, grams of Ibogaine per kilogram of body weight. And so, I mean, Ambio, like I said, they're top notch.
They know what they're doing.
Yeah, you're not
very professional.
And before you do it, you have to send them blood work and send them an EKG. And then when you get down there, the first thing you do is blood work, piss in a cup, and EKG. Yeah. And they've actually found some stuff on EKGs and told people, sorry, you came to Tijuana, but you can't do Ibogaine. Sure. We'll take you back to the airport. But, we found something on your EKG, so sorry.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're legit. Like, I would trust,
and they want to protect people.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. I mean, they really care about helping people. I mean, there are places in Mexico where they're like, hey, you pay them $1,000, they'll give you Ibogaine. And, I mean, I've heard stories from people of ended up in the ER room because they're crashing because they took too much Ibogaine. So I take the 5th pill, and the 5th pill doesn't make it any more intense. It just prolongs it.
I see. And
so what they tell you is, we take the pills at 9. You start at about 9 o'clock on Tuesday night, and it's funny the pills are red. I got a kick out of that. The whole Matrix thing.
Yeah.
You start at 9. Normally by about 11 o'clock, midnight, people are starting to get into it, and so
So is it nighttime just to decrease the sensory even more? Sensory element.
It's more also for kind of a sleep cycle thing, because if you do this, because the psychedelic state is so long, if you do it during the day, it's going to kind of jack with your sleep cycle.
Gotcha.
And Ibogaine is a stimulant, and so I'll talk about that here in a second. But even like when I did ayahuasca, we always did it at night.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because, and so I was like psychedelic from 6 to 10, 6 to midnight. And then, you'd sleep for a few hours and you'd wake up when the sun. So it's more of like trying to stay on a sleep cycle.
I see.
But you can do it. I mean, I know people that do mushrooms and stare at the clouds and talk to trees. So, I mean, you don't have to do psychedelics at night. I think it's more when you're doing it in a medical therapeutic setting, it's more like, hey, let's try to stay on sleep cycle here. Yep. And so, we do the Ibogaine, and they tell us at 10 o'clock we will give you an IV, and then after that IV, if you want, you're then welcome to go down in your room. And the day after you do Ibogaine, it's called the gray day, because Ibogaine, physiologically, it's like getting hit in the head with a wrecking ball. And so when you do Ibogaine, when you're psychedelic, you get auditory hallucinations. So it literally sounds like people are talking all around you.
Wow.
And all throughout the night, I'm like lifting my head up and lifting my visor up, and I'm looking around, and it's just the nurse. And the nurse is just sitting there like, hello, waving at you. And there's just like, I don't even know what they're saying. It's just like, it's kind of one of those, like you hear it in movies where it's like like 20,000 voices talking at once.
Sure. Gotcha.
It's weird. That's what it sounds like. So you get that. The nausea, I think, for me came from I kept moving my head too quickly, but Ibogaine really jacks with your interstitial fluid.
Yeah.
And so, when you're lying on a bed for 12 hours, you got to roll over. But when you roll over, you literally have to turn your body very slowly first, and you slowly have to roll your head. I was like,
way too quick.
Let me roll over, and then I'm like, So I think that's why I kept throwing up so much. But I was, pretty nauseous from it. And so the other weird thing that you get from Ibogaine is you get what's called ataxia. And that's I don't know, it's something with your limbs where you can't control your arms and your legs. It's basically like, if you can imagine, if you've been, like so hammered where you can't stand up and walk, that's what Ibogaine's like, but you still have control of your mind.
Yeah.
And like when you're psychedelic, you don't lose control of your senses. Like I knew everything that's going on around me. My brain is just in this altered state of perception. And so, it's one of the bad things is they're always like, don't drink too much because you're going to have to go to the bathroom. So I didn't drink anything before I did Ibogaine, but then there's constantly pumping IVs into me. Yeah. And I'm like, well, where do you think the IV fluid's going to go? Yeah, I'm throwing up, but so I'm constantly having to go to the bathroom. And with ataxia, I tried to get up and walk, and I was right back down on my butt again. Every time I had to go to the bathroom, I'd raise my hand. The nurse would come over. I have to go to the bathroom. They'd unplug your EKG, and then they would help you up. And then they would literally stand there with their arms out. I'm holding my arms at a 90-degree angle.
Yeah.
And they're facing me. And so I would put my arms, interlock my arms and their arms, and I would shuffle forward while they shuffle backwards down this long, probably a 20-meter hallway to get to the bathroom. And literally, like, that's all I can do is hold on to their arms and shuffle my feet. You can't walk anymore because of the ataxia. Every time I go to the bathroom, I would have to sit on the toilet, and I would almost fall off the toilet.
Your balance
there was
off.
no way I could have stood to pee. I don't know what it does, but it does something with your interstitial fluid.
Yeah.
So your balance is completely out of whack, and you have no control over your arms and legs. But I was, not everybody gets visuals, but I was one of the few people that on my trip that got visuals. And so the mask that I'm wearing, it's got foam inserts so I can open my eyes up underneath. And so I had my eyes open the whole time. And Ibogaine was really cool because, like with ayahuasca and with psilocybin and with 5-MeO, the medicine's going to give you it's going to show you what it wants to show you. With Ibogaine, you can actually ask it, like, hey, can I see this? Hey, can I see that?
Manipulate it.
Yeah. And so, like, in my mind, I would just say, hey, Ibogaine, can you show me images of when I was a baby?
It's amazing.
And so, and like I said, that block to my subconscious self is gone. And so I'm pulling up memories that I had no idea were there. Like, I'm seeing myself as a little baby in a diaper playing with my mom on our 1970 shag carpet. And I asked
it feels like a genuine memory.
Yeah, but the weird thing is, it's not like videos; it's just still frames, and that's pretty common. Like most people I've talked to, like when you're recalling memories, it's just still frames. Like you don't see videos, And so I don't know how long, but so the 10 o'clock comes and goes, and I'm still psychedelic, and I asked one of the nurses, I'm like, hey, I'm still psychedelic. Can I stay in here? And the nurse is like, yeah, sure. And so I was the only person still in the ceremony room. The sun's up, and there's still a nurse sitting in there with me while I'm in the ceremony room. And it's funny, one of my buddies, he and I were F-14 instructors together. He works for Ambio now as a coach, and he was my coach on this journey. I hadn't seen the guy in 20 years.
That's amazing.
And so he comes up to check on me that morning at somewhere around lunchtime.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, Ragged, how are you? And I remember he lifts my face mask off, and I'm like, dude, I'm seeing some cool shit. I'm like, can I stay here? And he starts laughing, and he's like, yeah, buddy, you can stay here as long as you want. You're good. And so I think he told me that was kind of noonish.
Yeah.
And so I'd been psychedelic for probably 11 hours by that point, and I'm still going strong. They bring in a Reiki massage, and a Reiki is it's a specialist who moves energy throughout your body.
Sure.
And I know people that have had Reiki massages. I had one still psychedelic, and I'm like, man, when you're feeling this person moving energy through your body while you're psychedelic, I'm like, oh my God, I literally felt like she was moving my bones around.
Incredible.
Through my body. It was the weirdest physiological feeling. But I was psychedelic until probably 4 o'clock that afternoon.
Wow.
Probably 14 hours.
Wow.
It was intense. And finally, there was like this one image that like it just would not leave.
Yeah.
And I figured out afterwards my integration, it's because I wasn't figuring out what Ibogaine was trying to show me with the image. But finally I was like, hey, Ibogaine, thanks, I'm tired. And by this point now it's 4 p.m. on Wednesday, and I've been up since 7 a.m. on Tuesday.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and there every now and then I'd start dozing off, and then the medicine would wake me back up again. And so by 4 o'clock, I'm like, hey, Ibogaine, thanks. I'm worn out. I appreciate it. Can you take the images away? And as soon as I said that, it went boop and went black. I saw no more images. And so then I told the nurse, I'm like, hey, I'm ready to go to my bed now. And so, the nurse helps me down to my bed. I've still got ataxia. I think I get into my bed at 5 p.m. that night. I'm still throwing up. They bring IVs into my bedroom,
Sure.
and they're still pumping IVs into me because I'm still throwing up at 6 o'clock that night. And then I enter the second phase of Ibogaine that nobody ever talks about, but this to me is the hardest phase of it. It's another 12-hour phase of where you get very introspective on yourself, and it is emotionally running a marathon emotionally.
Yeah.
I mean, I questioned every decision I made. I questioned why I'm there. I mean, it was so difficult going through that.
Yeah.
And so I wake up at, I think I end up falling asleep for a few hours, on like early between like, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Luckily they don't have clocks. And so I'm just kind of guessing on the time, because the worst thing you want to do when you're psychedelic on Ibogaine is staring at a clock, because I mean, it's no kidding. It's a 2-day ordeal.
Yeah.
Thursday I wake up and I'm feeling better. I'm still nauseous as hell, but I'm not throwing up anymore. I'm able to eat a little bit. And I think I'd slept maybe 2 hours by that point, because Ibogaine's a stimulant. And so you're going to go, probably 2 days without sleeping much, because it's a stimulant.
And does your body know that you've been up 2 days?
My brain didn't care. My body was like, dude, you're killing me.
Yeah.
I mean, my body, I just felt like I was 51.
Gotcha.
But my brain was like, I'm ready, man. Let's go. It was weird.
An interesting dichotomy.
Yeah. And so that Thursday morning, I eat a little bit, and I felt awful. I mean, if you could imagine like the worst hangover you've ever had, that's what I felt like Wednesday night and Thursday morning. And I felt so bad. I was like, man, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do 5-MeO. I mean, I felt so bad. And like 10 o'clock that morning, I'm like, you know what? I came down here to heal. And I'm like, I've rallied from worse than this when I was in the Navy. I'm like, I'm doing 5-MeO. 5-MeO is really unique when you do it, because you inhale it. And I did the synthetic version. So Ibogaine is it's one of, I think, 12 alkalis that comes from the Iboga tree. And it comes from the second layer of root bark from this tree that's indigenous to Western Africa. It's mostly in the country of Gabon. And that's where the Ibogaine comes from, the Iboga tree, and they isolate that alkali out of the root bark.
Amazing.
And so that's what the Ibogaine is.
Yeah.
5-MeO DMT, if you've ever seen Beavis and Butthead Do America, when Beavis licks the toad, that's 5-MeO DMT. It's the venom of the Sonoran desert toad. And the only way to get it is you got to find the toad and scare the hell out of it, because it's a defense mechanism.
It'll secrete it.
Yeah, it secretes it.
Yeah.
And so then you got to be there with a jar to catch the fluid.
Gosh.
And so there's a lot of people that are like, hey, man, that's not cool to do that to the toads. And the only way to find these toads is you got to be out at night in the Sonoran desert after a thunderstorm. That's when they come out of their habitats.
Sure.
So literally people go out there with mirrors and flashlights after thunderstorms in the Sonoran desert to find these damn toads to scare the hell out of them and harvest their venom. So then you can light it on fire, and so you basically aerosolize it with a flame, and then you inhale it.
Wow.
And so Ambio uses a synthetic version of 5-MeO. They don't go scouring the deserts for toads.
Sure.
People have synthesized it.
Yeah.
And so, but it's a really, really tiny amount. And when you do 5-MeO, I mean, you have to be trained how to administer it, because Ibogaine and ayahuasca and psilocybin, it's like, here, just take these pills, drink this drink, or eat these mushrooms.
Yeah.
It's not hard. 5-MeO, you actually have to inhale this vapor. There's a vial hooked up to a kind of like a e-cigarette kind of a thing.
Sure. Yeah.
And and we're outside at Ambio at this house, and there's you're sitting up on a mattress, and you've got the blindfold, and at this point you put the blindfold on, and actually no. So when they start, you got the blindfold up, and they're like, all right, start breathing. Yeah. And so when they say start breathing, you're starting to kind of do this quick in out, in out, in out. And the person administering it is heating up this vial of 5-MeO with a lighter. And once the 5-MeO starts aerosolizing, they're like, all right, I'm going to count down from 10, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. And as they get to like 3, then they're like, okay, big exhale, okay, big inhale, hold it, and then exhale. And then they're like, okay, and they stick it up to your mouth, and you take this huge inhale, and you want to try to pull it all into your lungs. And so the first time and then at this point, right before that, you put your visor down, and then as soon as you inhale it, they help lay you backwards onto this mattress. And the first time I did it, I screwed up the inhale, and I knew it immediately, because I started, this part I think I probably will tell, because it's for me it's pretty cool. But I started in this tunnel, but then I could tell like it wasn't right. Like I could just feel something was off.
Sure.
And 5-MeO is weird because you can't talk. And you can barely control your arms. And so there's a process where at AMBO you can do 5-MeO twice.
Okay.
I knew I'd screwed it up, and I immediately, and so the signal is if you want to do it again, you're supposed to raise your hands and do this. And so I'm like, okay, I screwed this up. I need to do the hand thing. And so I'm like, it was hard for me to control my arms.
Sure.
I'm like doing this. And my buddy Slider, he's the one administering it. He whispers, he's like, Raggett, you just got into it. He's like, give it some time. I'm like, and so then I start doing this. I'm like, dude.
Which is funny. I think that's the baby sign for when to eat.
Is that what? Probably that could be what it
more.
is.
That's more.
Is it more?
That's more.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
That's more.
Oh, there you go.
That's
sign
probably what
language.
it is.
It's sign language for more. Yeah.
Oh, that's probably what it is then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying more.
Yeah.
And so then, I come out of it. He raises me up and he's laughing. And I'm like, dude, I knew immediately I screwed the inhale up. He's like, all right, got it. We'll do it again.
Yeah.
So we go through the whole thing, and I lay back, and everybody's 5-MeO experience is different, because it gives you what you need. But both times I did it, I laid down, and I had no idea what to expect. And I laid down, I'm laying there, and I see this light in this black tunnel, and I see these rays of light coming at me. And I'm not even thinking about this at the time, but afterwards I'm like, shit, that's what people who've had near-death experiences have explained.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting here seeing this light, and in my brain, I'm screaming. And as I'm screaming, I'm releasing all that anger and fear and just all the bullshit I've been carrying with me.
You're literally screaming?
In my mind, I was screaming.
Okay.
Apparently, physiologically, because you lose control of your body under 5-MeO also. Like doing the more thing was really hard.
Sure.
And so my buddy Slider told me that my body was kind of restless, and every now and then I'd let out a moan.
Interesting.
But in my brain, I'm screaming.
Yeah.
And I'm just letting everything out. And as I'm doing that more and more and louder, I'm getting closer to this light. And my buddy Slider keeps telling me, he's like, Raggett, just give in. You're getting closer.
You were resisting.
Yeah. He's like, just give in.
Yeah.
And I asked him, I'm like, dude, how could you tell? He's like, I could tell just by you flinching.
Yeah.
And so, as he's saying that, I'm yelling louder and louder, and I'm getting closer. And I get so close to this light, I can feel the warmth. And, we talked before about 5-MeO. Its nickname is the God particle, because if you do it right, you will sit with God. And that's what I experienced. And so I get right up to this light, and I'm like, oh, I'm sitting with God now. I can feel the warmth. I feel the love.
Yeah.
This is God. And I hear him lean down and say, hey, Raggett, you're almost there, dude. Just give in. You're just about there.
Yeah.
And when he says that, and this is why I think I love doing 5-MeO after you do Ibogaine, because I think Ibogaine is kind of the wrecking ball that stirs everything up.
Sure.
But I thought about this. This is the one thing I'll share from Ibogaine. I had asked the Ibogaine at one point. I was like, Ibogaine, what does my family want from me? And at this point, I saw a picture of my wife and my 2 kids, and I had this thought that they just want you to be happy. And so when my buddy said that, he said, "You're almost there." In my mind, I reached down and I thought about that.
Yeah.
My family saying, even now I'm still, every time I say this, I kind of choke up a bit. But I thought about, my family just wants me to be happy. And I literally reached down and felt like I was grabbing down into my soul everything I've been carrying with me from my post-traumatic stress and my anxiety and depression. And I let out this scream in my mind.
Yeah.
My buddy said that my body actually let out. He said it was the most beautiful, blood-curdling scream he had ever heard. And all of my buddies who were there with me, I was the last one to go. And so everybody else was sitting outside about maybe 10 meters away from me. Yeah. And they all heard it, and they were all like, holy fuck, what was that? And so as soon as I did that, I let out this scream. I immediately in my mind saw this black smoke leave my body, and it went through this light into this into a realm of nothing but black space. It was infinite space and time. And so I've been trying to do a lot of reading to figure out what the hell was that. So when I was in that realm, I had no idea, no recollection of time. I had no thoughts. I have no memories. All I know was I felt nothing but beauty and love when I was in whatever state that was. And so
that was due to the light.
Yeah, and so I went through the light.
You went through the light, and that's when you saw in the darkness.
Into this realm of just complete infinite dark, space and time. And so, like I said, I had no like thoughts.
Yeah.
And so basically, what I've talking to my therapist, talking to people, I've gotten into meditation, and my meditation coach has studied Tibetan, some very advanced Tibetan meditation techniques, and he's basically like, So my buddy Slider was like, you just had a neurological reset is what happened. And so, but in psychological terms, I experienced complete ego dissolution where I was able to completely detach my conscious self from my ego. That like Freud talked about and Jung talked about. Yeah. And that's the hardest thing. I've done a lot of crazy things in my life, flying F-14s, graduated from Top Gun, earned my PhD. The hardest thing I've done is to basically give up not caring about yourself and your ego and releasing, basically releasing that care because we are so driven by our egos and by this sense of self that we have.
Sure.
And so I was able to give up that sense of self. And so talking to my meditation and, even now when I hear myself saying this, I'm like, man, I sound like some crazy, Buddhist hippie. But, basically he was like, what you experienced was kind of a curtain call for death. And I'm like, well, that would explain the, tunnel and the light. Sure. But he's like, in Buddhist terms, where you went to what's called the truth realm, where you experienced, infinite space and time.
Yeah. And
so, I think the reason why I shared that experience is because, even to this day, I feel different. I feel this, I still feel my ego, but I've got like this more of this observer where like I can observe my ego now when I'm having these weird ego bouts. I'm like, oh, look at that, and so it's like my conscious self is still detached from my ego.
Yeah.
And so that's really what's driving me now, because a lot of people are like, man, how can you be so vulnerable and share all this? And I'm like, I attribute it to my 5-MeO experience, because I've experienced something that's bigger than what we know of as this life we call our life. Yeah. And that's where, I don't know if I sat with God, because just hearing myself say that sounds, crazy, but, I sat with something higher than what we know of as our life.
Yeah.
And so I call it God. But, other people may call it crazy, but but yeah. And so, it's funny now, I've came across this poem from like a 12th century Persian poet that, it said, I went searching for God and I found myself. I went searching for myself and I found God. Ah. And I'm like, yeah, that pretty much sums up my Ibogaine 5-MeO experience. Because when I went down there, I was like, F God, God doesn't exist. Why would God, have us kill each other? Why would he have us all the suffering? And,
sure.
And, growing up in, conservative church, we, describe it as, man's will. And so when I went down there, I was about the farthest thing from believing in God. But now I'm like, I don't know what that was I sat with, but there is some being higher than us that I sat with, and I'm completely spiritual now and believe 100% that there is some kind of a being that I call God. Every religion has a different name for it, but I call it God because that's what I experienced, and that's why 5-MeO is nicknamed the God particle, because if you do it right, you will sit with this being.
Yeah, I'll just say, as a spiritual but also a religious person, I couldn't agree with you more, Trey. There is a higher being. I have my beliefs on that. Other people differ from that, but I know in my deepest part of my soul that there is a higher being. So I do believe that that's what you experienced. Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that experience of going out in the flight deck early in the morning, being the first to take off, having that cinematic kind of like, oh, this is cool. I just had that throughout your entire explanation of your journey as a listener. And that's a testament to how vulnerable you have been with us. And I want you to know that that doesn't just pass us by.
Right.
Jason and I have been so fortunate, and I've mentioned this multiple times, but it's worth re-mentioning because it's true. Jason and I have been so fortunate to speak with veterans who have led us into their world and opened up some really deep, dark things with us that I never feel worthy of being an audience to, and yet they tell us. And so it's a great honor when they open up like that. That's how I feel right now with you sharing your journey and your experience. I honor what you're saying about, everyone has the different experience with Ibogaine and with 5-MeO DMT. I really appreciate that you shared some anecdotes about your experience. It's great for my own understanding. I think our audience will appreciate that as well. You answered a question I was going to ask. What was the result? And you answered it. You now have, it almost seems like you sort of have a battle buddy, for lack of a better term. That's an Army term, as you know. But you sort of have a battle buddy now with you at all times. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, to some extent, yeah, because I've experienced this separation between my conscious self and my ego-driven self. And so, yeah, I kind of have my own little battle buddy. Yeah. Hopefully I don't run into any more hua bars. Did they still have those in the Army when you were in? God, those are awful.
Something I'm glad, I'm kind of rambling here, but it got me to what I wanted to ask because I think it's really important. Earlier you mentioned that you were driving home and you already knew what you were going to do. You were planning out your suicide letter, but you got a call from your counselor that was stationed at Sky Air Force Base. I was just curious, if you don't mind sharing, what was it that he said that made you pull to the side of the road and then drive to Sky Air Force Base?
I don't remember exactly the conversation because I was in kind of this weird out of body state.
Sure.
It's I don't know, when you get in that state, when you're actually thinking about taking your own life, like obviously your brain's not functioning properly.
Yeah.
But the thing that really resonated that he said to me at some point was, and I mentioned this earlier, about the generational effect of suicide.
Gotcha.
Where, when you look at suicidality, people who have had issues with suicidal ideation or who have actually committed suicide, they had like a parent or brother, somebody, in a direct part of their nuclear family that also committed suicide. And so, when he told me that, and I think that's through all my periods of suicidality, I remember that just kept popping up. I don't want my kids to have to fight the suicidality because their dad did it.
Yeah. Was there anyone in your life that had?
No.
Okay.
No. Which so I don't think that's always the case, but talking to this therapist, and I've confirmed this with other therapists that this
you didn't want to start the chain.
Yeah, I didn't want to be patient zero in the suicidality chain in my family, and so I think that's kind of downplaying it a bit or trying to bring it's that dark humor.
I know what you mean.
But I think it was, like I didn't want to pass that on to my kids, but I also, it was also my love that I had for my kids, that I knew that love was in there.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I'm working on right now. I mentioned earlier how I'm trying to rediscover my emotions. Sure. I'm doing that right now, but trying to learn what it feels like to love my kids again. And so that's part of what I'm working on. Like, that's what I'm going to work on when I go back down and do Ibogaine. That's one of my intentions is I want to work on learning to feel, I know I feel love for my kids. I want to actually feel that love in my heart.
Your first journey was about discovering yourself in a way. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like your second journey, you're trying to plan it so that you can discover how you emote love and emotion to those around you.
Yeah, I think it's also internally too. Like, I want to actually.
That's an ongoing process.
Yeah, I don't want to quote the Foreigner song, but I want to know what love is.
That's great.
But I want to be able to feel, like what love feels like again, because I don't remember what that. I know what it feels like because I felt immense love for my wife when we got married, but just all the combat deployments and the killing, and I lost that ability to feel it. So, I do want, and that's part of what I'm working on, is having other people feel my love,
Sure.
emote to them, but I also want to be able to feel it and know what it feels like in my heart.
Sure.
And so that's something I'm working on right now with my meditation too. And man, it's a bitch breaking through that barrier. That's where 10 years of combat, hard combat, I think it's hard to break that down.
The last thing I'll say, Trey, is I want to thank you again for being here with us, for giving of your time and for giving of your story. It's a really powerful, impactful story, and it's stories like yours, Trey, that make me so grateful that Jason and I are fortunate enough to have a platform like this so that we can share your story with our audience and with the world. I think it deserves to be told. So thank you for being so honest with us.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come share my story.
Of course.
And I think you mentioned it earlier, Ethan, where sometimes people have asked me why are you doing this? And I'm like, I'm doing it because I want people to know, not just veterans, but even civilians who are struggling with, severe anxiety, depression. There are people out here that care about you. And that's something I'm discovering right now, is that bond that we have, that's pretty powerful. And, when you have PTS, you end up, self-isolating. And so, I'm kind of relearning with that power of the bond. So, I want people to know, look, there are people that care about you and there's help. And in my experience, it's not in pills and it's not in somebody's office, but there's help that God put on this planet for some reason. And God has receptors in our brain that can receive, that can bind with these chemicals that he put on this planet. And so, that's kind of how I, because going into psychedelics, I wasn't super practicing in religion, because I kind of lost that in my combat deployments, but I was pretty religious, when I started off in the military, and I'm like, psychedelics, yeah. And,
Sure.
Now when you look at it, I'm like, God or this being put the stuff on this planet and gave us the receptors to bind with these chemicals. And
there must be a reason.
There must be a reason for it. And there's lots of us that are healing from it.
Yeah.
And so, I just want people to know, look, there's help out there, stay in the fight.
The last thing I wanted to say, I'm sorry, I know I already said this, but it just dawned upon me as you were talking, Trey. You even made a joke about it. Some people might call it crazy. And I caught myself saying things like, wow, that's wild, or that's crazy. I just want you to know, not that you need the reinforcement from me, but this is for our audience's sake. I want you to know that what you did is not crazy. What you experienced is not crazy. And if anyone needs a depiction of having it all together and being a decision maker in an instant, like you had to be as a backseater in the F-14, F-18, a Top Gun graduate, that's a picture of perfection in many ways, in many respects. And despite that, despite being a Top Gun graduate, despite being a naval officer, you still had the strength to know when you needed help and when you needed to seek it out, and you did. And so I think that just shows just how strong of an individual you are. So again, I feel it's a great honor to be in your presence this evening. So thanks again.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Man, thank you, Ethan. I didn't know if I can follow up with that one, but the last words that I have is I kind of was pondering as Trey was talking. For some reason, the number 3 is really popping into my brain, and I'm trying to ponder on why that number is coming to me. And from the very beginning of our conversation, we talked about 3 different people, which was Grandpa, Uncle, and Trey all being in the military. 3 different deployments, 3 different times where you almost had to eject, with all those stories around there. 3 of your family members, your wife and your 2 kids, the 3 of us, right? and you're in my mind, I'm thinking 3 journeys, right? The journey where you started, your military journey and this journey now. For some reason, the number 3 is popping into my brain. So for whatever that's worth.
Don't forget Trace.
Yeah, Trace. Yep. For whatever that's worth, I thought I'd throw that out there. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign off of the Operation Insight podcast from the Mid-America Veterans Museum. Operation Insight is brought to you by the Mid-America Veterans Museum. Do you like our podcast? With your support, we'll continue to bring you great programming. If you'd like to donate, go to mavm.org and click on Donate.